Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at North Norfolk District Council on Wednesday, the 9th of November. The first item on our agenda today is to receive apologies for absence.
Yep, we have apologies from councillors Adam Varley and councillor Sarah Butikofer.
Thank you. Item 2 is substitutes.
Yes, we have councillor John Toy for councillor Sarah Butikofer.
Okay, thank you for coming along today, Councillor Toy. And moving on to item 3, public questions and statements. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. So that's the minutes of the meeting we held on the 28th of September. That's the previous to the last meeting. So we've got 2 sets of minutes to approve today. So if we can just go through them for accuracy. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Are you comfortable that they are a fair and accurate record of that meeting? Okay, I see no hands to say otherwise, so I will sign those as accurate later. So moving on then to the second set of minutes, which is the meeting of the 12th of October. Again, for accuracy, page by page, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28. Are you happy that they are again a fair and accurate record of that meeting? Nobody to say otherwise? Okay, you're happy to accept both of those. Thank you. Mr. Show of hands, please, just to do that formally. Thank you. Right. I will sign both of those shortly. Item 5, items of urgent business. I'm not aware of any.
And received, just to note, for any members that haven't got a copy, there are the Serco printed updated reports at the front if anyone needs one.
Yeah, thank you for that. Item 6, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of today's business? No. Okay, thank you. Item 7, petitions from members of the public.
None received.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 9, responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee reports or recommendations.
Just to note that I'm in the process of arranging a meeting to discuss the addition of contextual information in performance reports. I had suggested Friday, but I'm not sure everyone's able to attend that, so I'll look to get something in the diary next week.
Okay. Thank you. Right, moving to item 10. Item 10 is the first substantive item on our agenda today, and you will be aware we've got reports from Serco, some within the minutes and some issued by email and by hard copy today. We have from Serco today Mr. Roach, and we have Officer Hems and Officer Martin here representing the client side, and Mr. Roach, the contractor side. I'm going to suggest a particular approach to you today, because I'm mindful we've got quite a lot of detail in front of us. We've also probably got a lot of what I would call ward level experience of what's been happening out there. And somehow we just need to kind of coordinate that into an appropriate level for this committee. So I'm going to suggest that there are 5 key areas or key points that we should explore today, and I will briefly go through them. And if you're comfortable with those, then we'll follow that model. If not, then I'm open to any other suggestions that you might have. So the issues break down into these following 5 points. Reasons for so many missed collections, unfinished rounds and complaints. Second is remedies for those and the evidence that they are working today. 3, when can we expect performance to equal or better than before the 5th of September? 4 is the progress on the target operating model gap analysis. And 5, when can we expect to reach an agreed level of compliance with the target operating model? Now, does that cover at a fairly sort of high level the concerns that you are have in your minds today? And if you, Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just it probably fits in with that, but I have some questions around the numbers that are reported to us and where they fit in. So hopefully it's a general question. It's not ward related, but I think there's some questions about the numbers and what they represent, which I'd like to ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing to stop us diving down into the detail during the course of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Mr. Hems to kick off with an introduction, and then Mr. Roach, and we'll go through them in that order, and hopefully that will cover the concerns that we have today. Are you happy to proceed in that manner? Okay, thank you. Over to you then, Officer Hems.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm just going to start with a very brief introduction, but I want to hand over to George Roach as soon as possible, because he is the person with all of the detail and information. Obviously, we are now a number of collection cycles down from the 5th of September, when this introduction of the new target operating model was introduced. You know, we are now, and you can see that performance is beginning to improve. The frustration, I think, on our part is the rate of that improvement, but then we need to compare that with performance pre the introduction. But also, I think we need to really bottom out with Serco those repeated issues that I think at a ward level you will all be aware of, in terms of things that we've raised repeatedly but haven't yet been successfully resolved in a way that residents who have suffered issues have seen those go away. And I'm sure George will touch on some of that during his presentation. But I'll hand over to George, because I think it's important you hear from him and have the opportunity to ask any questions of George. I'll pick up some of the bits later on, Chair, in terms of your 4th point around the gap analysis by way of an update. But I think in the first, your first sort of key lines of inquiry that you set out, they are very much for George to respond, and we'll add as appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Over to you, Mr. Roach.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Just by way of introduction, I was here with a lot of you. I think it was about 3 weeks ago for a first update. That was a verbal update. Asked to produce a written set of reports, which is what we presented today. We are now we've completed week 9 last week of our what we set out as a 12-week change period for the introduction of the TOM. So moved to the new operating model on the 5th of September. the change in the service collection was on a scale of change within the tripartite agreement that we've got. We did Breckland and Kingsland have already gone through their change to the target operating model. North Norfolk was the last one that we did. North Norfolk was the biggest change. So the change affected 90% of the residents in North Norfolk, with either a collection day change or actually a collection week change, where we were moving the collection weeks around. So the scale of change is significant, and the scale of change for the drivers has been significant for the crews as well. So the previous operating model was operating on an east-west basis. So we had crews who exclusively operated in the east of the borough and crews who exclusively operated in the west of the borough. The new model is a near and far model. So the crews that were exclusively operating in the west have now collections in the east as well. So they have had new areas that they've had to learn, which touches on some of the reasons for why we've seen an increase in the misspins and why we've seen a struggle just to get the completion on a daily basis. That is due to the crews learning where the new areas are. So we've used as much local knowledge as possible by moving loaders around those crews who know some of the areas. So we've tried to pair up a loader who was working in the east with a loader who was working in the west onto the truck so that we can get as much information as possible. We still have had a struggle where the drivers are learning those new areas. However, we are seeing an improvement pretty much day by day on our completion rates and also the number of misspins coming through, to try and mitigate that effect. The other steps that Serco took within this is we have 6 additional vehicles that we've hired in for the 12-week transition. These are crewed by agency crews. There was a challenge at the beginning of our go live at Tom. We were struggling to recruit drivers through the agency or actually just in general. We had enough drivers to put out our frontline crews, our 13 crews plus our garden waste. We did struggle with putting out our support crews, which led to a spike in miscollections at the beginning of the go live, which has had a knock-on effect going down, which has slowed our progress to where we would like to be. I would like to see us further along than where we are now, but that has been a bit of a slowing impact on there. We have rectified that now, and we do have full support crews out, barring any sickness or absence that we currently experience. But we have those support crews out daily to assist with the miscollections that are being reported and also to try and increase our completion every day. The crews currently are working extremely hard to rectify this. So the guys on the ground are working a fair amount of overtime, and we also have crews coming in on Saturdays and Sundays to make sure we can solve the problem and not have residents waiting weeks with our collections. So it is something that we've put in place to make sure we can actually try and finish the week where we are, and we're now moving towards where we can increase our daily completion rate so residents aren't having to wait the next day to be caught up with where they are. Just to go through the graphs and the numbers, I know you had a question regarding that. Hopefully I can just give you a quick update on those. So the first page was pre-go live. So what I've done is taken the misspins or the reported misspins that come through from residents. So these would be residents who haven't had a service. They've contacted our call center and they've reported the bin as a misspin. It's how we track in pretty much all contracts where we've got misspins coming through. So the first page is just a graph showing what those were for the 4 weeks pre-go live, just to give an understanding of where we were with our misspins. And then the next page is just the garden waste bins split into garden waste and assisted. The first page is refuse and recycling and assisted. Garden waste has not gone through a change in the target operating model. So we didn't actually change any of our garden waste rounds as of yet within North Norfolk. It was only refuse and recycling that was changed. The next slide is the misspins that have been reported for the 9-week period that we've traveled through. So obviously the first week being the 5th of September up to week 9. I updated this at Scott's request fairly recently, so this includes last week's data as well. The first set of reports that's in the briefing pack would only be up to week 8. Currently, so these are up to week 9, and these are the misspins that are being reported on refuse and recycling, and then the assisted collections are next to that. just broken those out so we can see where the assisteds are. And then the same with the garden waste. And the last slides are the completion rates in day. So these are taken on a daily basis through our white space system. And these show us, this is basically all the rounds combined, garden waste and refuse and recycling, on what our completion rate is for that day on a percentage level. And then the last one is just the number of properties that have been, when we say missed, not completed in day. So for instance, on last week, we're looking at, on the Monday, there were 726 properties that weren't collected on the Monday. Those would have been moved over to the Tuesday for collection by our support crews as they go through. So these haven't been reported as missed bins. These are the ones we're seeing on our system of not being completed in the day of collection. And the very last one is just a update from a customer call center. So it's just a breakdown of our call disposition, the 4 weeks pre-go live at the top, and then 8 weeks since go live, just as a comparison of the number of calls we were getting. This isn't broken down just for North Norfolk. The call center deals with Breckland, Kingsland, and North Norfolk. So this is the total volume of calls that we received, and then broken down by what those calls are regarding as they come through to our call center from them.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's go for the first sort of key line of inquiry then here. So the reasons then for so many miscollections and unfinished rounds and complaints. So if we kick off with you, the contractor, Mr. Roche, and then we'll hear from the client in response to that.
So I think the reason why we have seen a spike in the miscollections and the complaints that have come through is, as I was discussing earlier, it's the scale of the change that we've taken through. So with 90% of residents having a day change, some of the initial complaints that we had coming through were where residents hadn't understood the change, either hadn't read the letters in the calendars. So we had a fair amount of our initial complaints were just explaining what the change was to residents at the beginning of the service. The other reason for it is, as I said, the drivers having to learn parts of those new areas. So they haven't had to learn 100% of their new route. It's more where we've had those drivers who normally work in the west now having to go to the east, or the east having to go to the west. So as they're learning those areas, and specifically where the bins are stored. So coming from a urban concentration, it's a lot easier. The bins are presented curbside, you drive down the road and the bins are there. North Norfolk is not made up that way. And there are some lanes where actually we can't even get our trucks down. So the crews physically have to walk down the lane and pull all the bins up to be serviced. Some of those have led to where potentially either if we've had an agency driver on or a crew that doesn't know that they need to go down the alleyway to get the bins, that has led to complaints and misses in the service where we haven't had those. What we've been doing is working with the Scott and his team to make sure we can get some maps out to those drivers. We can tell them where those areas are that they have been missing repeatedly to try and increase that service level, which we have seen an increase in the completion and a decrease in the missed bins. So it is working, albeit not as fast as we would like it to be.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers the first point to a degree.
It's your answer. I think what I would like to hear now is the client view on that, please.
So absolutely, it was a significant change. The impact of that was all that we knew that there would always be an impact in terms of that bedding in over a period of time. I think what we need to be mindful of is a couple of things around that. The reason that Serco introduced this home far and away methodology as a change was on the basis that enabled two things. It enabled them to be more efficient in terms of the travel distance to the tipping away point, so that our point of disposal in North Norfolk for residual is around North Walsham, and for recycling is at the depot at Aylsham. And obviously, if a crew is working exclusively over in the far reaches of the west of the district, then they have to trundle backwards and forwards during the day. By moving it so that the near bit, the sort of the near part of it is close to those disposal points, it makes it more efficient from a mileage point of view. So there was really good reasons for doing that, but it has led to an increased level of crews doing work that they're not familiar with, which I think we've seen as well, or we see that when crew knowledge is not as good, and this isn't just about the introduction of it, this is about covering holidays, that it has a significant impact on the completion of those rounds, because crew knowledge is an essential part of understanding a very complex rural district where there are lots of places that are tucked out of the way. But also, I think it's fair to say that we have seen impacts that that aren't Serco specific. They are national impacts. So particularly around driver availability, we've been aware for some considerable time nationally that there are significant issues with drivers across both the haulage and HGV sectors, but also into the public service vehicles, into bus drivers, etc. They're not a ready commodity that there aren't hundreds of them beating down the door to come and work for Serco or elsewhere. So there is competition in that market, and I think part of the issue has been about Serco being able to find people on an agency basis to cover short-term absence, etc., both through sickness and holidays. And that has had an impact on their ability to complete rounds and do it in a way that's compounded that familiarity issue. And sometimes I think when we've seen this is not an issue unique to the new target operating model. The contractor runs an efficient round system. That round system assumes that everything is going to run as planned, and so vehicle breakdowns, crew sickness, accidents to vehicles, which happens reasonably frequently, all mean that has an impact on the ability to complete a round in time. And of course, if you push a round completion to the following day, then with the lack of capacity, i.e. the lack of drivers, then the crews that should be doing today's work are catching up on yesterday's work. And that is now being resolved because Serco have managed to access additional drivers. So the impacts that we had initially, effectively, if you run behind one day without sufficient catch-up and mop-up crews, it impacts on the rest of the week, which is why Serco have been working on occasions on Saturdays and Sundays. And I think it's real testament to the Serco staff, the collection staff, that they have worked incredibly hard to continue to provide that service. So I think those are the main issues. There's a lot more complexity in it, to be honest with you, but those are the main issues that we've seen. And I think there is a lot that has been done, and there is a lot still to be done to try and resolve those issues in a long-term sustainable basis. And Scott, Officer Martin, I know, has daily meetings with the Serco staff to work out what's going on that day and what we're doing. And as officer cohort, we are pushing very hard and working very closely with Serco to make sure that improvement is being made and then is sustainable. So that's the reasons. I probably strayed into your second question slightly.
That's fine.
Chair, but those are the main reasons behind these. It's a complex district. It's the biggest change that Serco have done. It's a very rural locality with lots of places that are quite difficult to find potentially, and crew familiarity, crew availability in terms of covering sickness or absence or mop up has just caused those delays in the first instance. I'll let you move on to your second point.
Well,
if
before we do,
before-
I think I've got certainly one question, but I think there's one obvious question that we need to ask, and that is, with the benefit of hindsight, and we're all very good at that. With the benefit of hindsight, what would you have done differently in the preparation for this major transition?
I think the challenge about that is we don't have, we have the benefit of hindsight now. At the time, there were a number of factors that we were not necessarily aware of in terms of the impact of, crew availability, etc. I think Serco did an awful lot of work around familiarity for staff. They took their crews off and got them to drive the rounds in terms of locality. They involved the crews with the design of those rounds. I'm going to come back to the point that in terms of the vast majority of our residents, they have seen their collections done on the day that they were scheduled, or where there has been delays due to a shifting a day because of the numbers, of issues. They've had it done on the following day of collection. Committee were informed last time that 99.96% of residents had their collections as normal. So in hindsight, yes, of course, we'd like to have addressed the issues that have led to the relatively small number of people. We'd like the system to be running perfectly. Ultimately, Serco would like the system to be running perfectly because they've designed it to be an efficient system, and they're putting in support, which is obviously, there is a cost to Serco. There's no cost to the authority of that, but there is a cost to Serco of continuing that support. So there is a real desire on all parties to make sure this is running efficiently and effectively as per the TOM as quickly as possible. But I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that the issues that we're facing are not, some of these issues are not Serco specific. And actually, those that are Serco specific are a product of them working in an environment that is a local authority based contract. So driver availability, and we've shared this before. So driver availability last year, a very large supermarket paid drivers a £2,000 sign-on bonus because they could put a couple of pence on a product here and there across their range, and that was over the Christmas period. So drivers flocked to that large supermarket in order to go and work for them across the Christmas period. But of course, once Christmas rush had finished, those drivers then returned back into a marketplace. But those sort of impacts where there are large scale activity going on have a definite impact on things. And Serco aren't in a position, because we pay on a fixed rate. There are increases, there's indexation within the contract that's built, which increases on an annual basis in arrears. But Serco don't have that ability necessarily, unless they take it at their cost, just to come along and say, hey, we're having this problem. Can the local authority find a huge amount of extra money for us to pay additional people? If they did, I'd resist it, because I have a duty to protect the public purse. But I think we need to recognise that some of the factors are national ones, and therefore it's very challenging within our area to look at them and say, hey, we could have fixed this by doing the following things. And Serco have worked with us and in discussion with us about resolving those issues, and have put measures in place to resolve those issues. But if they don't have drivers available, or drivers they do recruit don't then turn up, there's not a lot further that can be done on that. So,
okay, thank you. Mr. Roche, do you want to add anything to that?
Nothing from my side. I agree with everything that Steve was saying. It is the national issue with drivers. The only other point to add is we've seen driver wages, I guess, go up to the tune of around about 30% over just the period of time we've been in place at Norfolk Council. So it is a significant contributing factor. towards where we are is making sure we have enough drivers.
Okay, thank you for that. Before we move on to the second point then, Councillor Penfold, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one quick question, possibly two, and an observation. So what was the reason for the swapping of the crews from east to west? If those crews were sort of familiar with the areas they were working in previously?
So it was the home and away, or the near and far methodology that we've introduced. So basically what used to happen is, for instance, a crew would come to Cromer, they would fill their truck in Cromer, they would have to then drive all the way to North Walsham and tip, then drive all the way back to Cromer to do their second round, and then drive all the way back to North Walsham to tip. What we've done is that same crew would now come to Cromer, they would do their first load in Cromer, drive to North Walsham, tip, and their second load would then be local to where the tip is, to reduce that distance of driving. So where we had a lot of the crews who were further away from the tip, is they're now still driving. So we've got the crews driving to the furthest point and then back to the tip, and then doing local work around the area to try and improve to drive the efficiency. So that's where the change came from.
Thank you. And I was just looking at the bar charts that you gave us there, and I just wonder, for me, certainly it would be helpful. I'm just looking at page 3. So missed bins over 4 weeks pre-go live. And if we're looking at the numbers sort of running up the left-hand side, we're 0 to 70. If you flip over the page and you look at missed bins post-go live, and you're looking up the left-hand side, you're 0 to 400. So we've got a different scale on the graphs there. So I don't think that's a crafty way of trying to hide the stats. But I think if the pre-go live bars were matched up against the post-go live bars on the same scale, you'd see, for example, in week 4 of pre-go live, it's about 40. If you plop that one into the post-go live up to 400 chart, you'd see quite a significant difference between week 4 of the old and week 1 of the new. So, and then you see them relative to each other. So the contrast is much more noticeable. So for me, that would be a better way and a more sort of transparent way, I think, of showing those stats.
So, certainly, and it was not meant in any
I'm
way.
sure it wasn't.
I did have them originally, but unfortunately, because of the scale, you landed up with a very, very small bar chart, which is why I made them bigger from there. But certainly take on the advice from me.
I think it would just help us to see the nature of the change more easily. My last question, if that's all right, Mr. Chair. So you put in 6 additional vehicles, agency, crews and call centre staff for the 12-week transition period. Are you prepared to make that 12-week transition longer if necessary with those additional measures in place?
So this is definitely something that I've already spoken to my senior directors about, that if we're not at 100%, we will be keeping some of those additional staff in place. With regards to the call centre, we have actually seen I was in the call centre the last 2 days. We've seen a significant reduction in the number of calls coming through. So we will be reviewing our level of staff within the call centre. With regards to the actual numbers that we've got on the rounds, we are committed to making sure that we can get the service to where it needs to be. That's a commitment that we've had by putting in the extra rounds. As Steve mentioned, that's at no cost to the council. That's at a cost to us with putting through the TOM. I've got meetings with the contract manager, Matt, this afternoon, just to go through anything else as well. And if we need to keep those vehicles on, then we will keep them on to make sure we can get the service stable.
Just in response to that second question, I would hope, Councillor Penfold, that in the very, very near future, that there will be no need for having a difference in scale between pre and the post. And I think what we need to be mindful of, and I'll perhaps take some soundings from the chair at some point, is what information you would like presenting on a regular basis to this committee that they would find useful. So we'll make sure that we're capturing that in a format that is suitable for your purposes.
Okay, thank you. I've got several questions building. So I think probably brevity is going to be the key to this. We've got quite a bit of ground to cover. So please, Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for presenting today, and thank you to the officers too. I've been reading about potential industrial action within Serco. Is this something that you're worried about?
I'll start this one off. So I think the first thing I would say is that most sectors of our industries, and including ourselves, have been in pay negotiations over wage increase. It's particularly noticeable given the the situation in terms of inflation rates at the moment. I think the position we need to be very clear on is that the industrial relations are a matter for Serco, and I would just caution against delving into issues that may, given that there are ongoing pay negotiations. I think Mr. Roach might not want to comment too extensively on your question if that has the potential to influence or damage those ongoing pay negotiations.
Could I just say that I think that question, whilst I allow it, is not really germane to what we're dealing with right now, but it might be in the future. So we might return back to that at some stage. And I think probably I think it might be wiser to leave it at that point, and we'll pick it up if it becomes a reality at some stage in the future. Are you comfortable with that? Okay, thank you. So Councillor Spagnola, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again, all attending and presenting this morning. I've actually gone out and spoken to some of the staff on the ground with regards to their working conditions, because I'm very aware that usually they're the people who get it in the neck when things go wrong. And I have spoken to several different people, and they have quoted staff morale as being an issue, along with the retainment, mental health. And I just wonder how much this is impacting on sicknesses and absences, which could possibly in the future interfere with our rounds. So that's kind of, I just wonder how much you're putting into your staff at ground level to kind of give them the support to do their job.
George, I think at this, Chair, with I understand the reason for your question, Councillor Spagnola, but I think the position we have at the moment is that that's looking to the future, and I think we need to be really careful that we are not influencing the Serco position around workforce and current negotiations within this meeting. I absolutely understand the reason for it, and I'm happy to have a conversation offline in terms of our understanding of the current position. I think, the change, what I would say is any change will cause a degree of unsettling of staff. We see it within our own organisation when change happens. That will affect motivation. I think what George, I think the position is that what we have seen is that there are a number of staff who are incredibly keen and happy on the changes that have happened and are fully supportive of it. And there are a number of staff who are less keen and happy. I think, I don't know, George might want to comment on people's mental health. I think, the mental health of individuals across our society at the moment is not necessarily purely affected by work. I think people have significant pressures on them at the moment, and I'm conscious of the fact that in terms of Serco's cohort of staff, those pressures might be felt quite acutely because it is at the and this isn't a comment about the rate of pay that Serco make, but it is at potentially the lower end of the pay scales. So I think it would be dangerous for us to try and attribute elements to this change that perhaps are more widely affected by the current economic situation as a whole. But I'll let George
With reference to support for the staff, is the local team on site are very supportive of the staff. So Matt, my contract manager, is he pretty much speaks to all the staff as they come back to find out how their days have been going, what they've been doing, along with the supervisors. Serco as a company also take mental health very seriously. So for us, we have a number of other tools that are available to all staff. So our employee assistance program and our Thrive apps are things that we offer out to staff to assist with any mental health. And I'm also on site on a regular basis, catching up with the guys to make sure that we can fully understand any of their frustrations and change where we need to.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I think I take the view that Mr. Hems has articulated in a sense here. For the purposes of today's business, I don't see that as something that's for us to discuss today. It's a very legitimate question, and it's a question which we may return to at some stage in the future, but I don't think it's germane to the core issues that we need to tease out today. So are you comfortable if we just kind of park that and we may return back to that at a future meeting? Okay, thank you. Councillor Housden, and then
thank you, Mr.
Councillor
Chairman. Can I just address this to Mr. George Roach, please? Several things. Have you got a strategy in place for drivers at Christmas time? Because clearly there's going to be a hemorrhaging this year, because they'll be tempted away once again as we are now approaching the Christmas period. That's my first question. The second question is the fact of the knowledge of the rounds. You said the crews know the rounds, but the managers, as far as I understand, do not know the rounds. Because I've spoken to several of the crews who actually collect the bins from the streets, and I've spoken to several of the drivers. And when I've spoken to the drivers, I've said to them, how many times has the managers been out to understand the rounds and what you have to do? Every reply was never. Never. And I think, I assume you're the managing director of this particular arm of Serco. I actually think it's your job to go out from time to time with the crews, because until you understand what they have to go through every day, you cannot come back to this meeting and say how the collections are going other than graphical interpretation of statistics. You can't say where I live that the lorry has to reverse down the lane before it can even start to collect the bins. That's a time-consuming process. So I would like to know that some of your managers are going to go out with the crews, not on a nice sunny day, on a day when it's really rough, pouring down with rain. And actually, I would quite like you to go out with one of the crews. Would you be prepared to do that?
If I can come back, I'll start at the bottom and work my way back up to the top. So I'm the senior contract manager for the contract. I've been in place for 4 weeks now, officially. So I started at the beginning of October. Up until recently, I was running a separate contract for Serco in Rushmore, and I do regularly go out with the crews to collect food waste, refuse, recycling in the pouring rain and in the sun. It's something that I firmly believe in, and it's something that I expect my managers to do as well. I can also categorically say that Matt, my contract manager at North Norfolk, has been out with the crews and has actually gone out and done the collections himself with Jason, his senior supervisor. So both of those things are definitely happening, and I've witnessed them myself. I will be going out with the crews as well, and it will be in the next couple of weeks. So it won't be on a nice sunny day. It will be in the pouring rain. I have a set of waterproofs and a set of work boots that I'm happy to work in and do. So that is something that I firmly believe in. So that we can fully understand that. At this moment in time, yes, I have given you a statistical overview of where we were. That's the data that I had to hand. I do fully understand that the trucks within North Norfolk do a lot of reversing in a lot of tight areas. And as I said, not even the reversing. It's more about the loaders having to go down the alleyways and the side streets. And in some of those locations, pulling up to 20, 25 bins back up to the road on a pull and return basis. So I am fully aware of those issues and have actually experienced them myself in previous contracts. I can't say that I've done it in North Norfolk yet. but it is something that will be taking place over the next couple of weeks. I can definitely say that the managers at the depot, the contract manager and the senior supervisor have both been out and have both actually been out completing rounds. So where we have had failures, they've taken a truck out to go and do the work. So
Right.
that definitely does happen, and it happens in all the contracts that I work in from there.
Okay, fine, thank you. And Christmas cover, what's your process? And the other point about that was several of the drivers I spoke to, actually, I said to them, have you got a magnetic advertising on your truck looking for drivers? Because that's pretty well what everybody else is doing. And he said, no, as far as I know, the company have never done that. And I would have thought that's something that you should be considering. And finally, in calling you out to go out, I would be quite prepared to go out with you. So I'm not expecting you to do something that I wouldn't do.
I 100%, and again, I definitely and I understand the frustration. I really do, and it can seem sometimes, and it comes down from people that I work with, that senior members of our team don't come out. We have a change in Serco where we expect them to come out, and senior members of the team to come out, from our health and safety senior members through to I would love to push our managing director out onto a truck as well one day. I'm not sure how successful I'll be, but definitely
I'll do it.
I will.
I will do it
from there.
Happy to do it.
With regards to strategy for Christmas, it is one where we are constantly advertising for drivers. We've got agency in place, but as Steve mentioned earlier, we are in a situation where we can't offer the same rates of pay, unfortunately, as some of the large supermarkets can offer for that. What we are working towards is a more stable workforce where we won't be hemorrhaging drivers. So as we have a stable workforce who are working with us, and working towards having a happier workforce as well, and that's managing through the change, we wouldn't be hemorrhaging those drivers throughout, but we are constantly recruiting. Taking magnetic boards onto the truck is something that I'll take away from this meeting and see if we can implement fairly quickly. We do have signage up at different depots that I've worked at that are recruiting, and we are advertising on all the websites that we can in order to increase our driver numbers.
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're really looking for an HGV driver, aren't we? We've got two crew. Or we could have a chamber crew shortly. Right. Did you wish to respond or not? I saw your hand was hovering.
Well, only in regard of the Christmas situation, I suspect that the position we probably find ourselves with some of those large supermarkets might happen again in terms of the offer. I think the willingness of some of those staff to take up that offer, or some people to take up that offer is likely to be slightly less. I think the first last year was a big year, wasn't it, for that happening. I think the fact that those people worked for a very short period of time and then were let go, perhaps will have a settling effect over Christmas. So that I hope will be less, and also Serco have, as Mr. Roach has said, work very hard to get that stable workforce in general. And I think there is a certain attraction to being able to, okay, so you start very early, but you finish and you go home. Whereas a lot of the sort of work that the sort of other HGV work involves an awful lot of, being out and away from home overnight. So I think there is a real attraction for that from Serco employees.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you very much to all the crews, because they've done a fantastic job through this, and I always find them very charming and helpful. With the missed bins, where's the time factor in this data? Because the problem with my constituents has been that often they've been missed week after week after week, and they're not, and that's been 8 weeks down the line they've got in touch with me, and I don't see how that is reflected in the missed bin data. I'd be interested to see that. And the other question I had, the carbon footprint of this remediation must be quite high, all these little trucks going back and forth and Saturday and Sunday working and things like that. So I wondered if anyone had taken into consideration of that. Thank you.
So I can certainly tease out the data for either repeat misses or the time it takes for us to achieve those misses. But I think that comes back down to what Officer Hems was saying earlier, is getting a suite of reports together that I can start making sure that the correct data that you would like to see is coming out to you, you know, on a regular basis. So we can do that. The carbon footprint, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. The carbon footprint is something that we're tracking. Yes, there is currently with the support crews a higher level of carbon footprint while we're going through this 12-week TOM process. The goal is ultimately to reduce the carbon footprint overall, so that hence the reason for the change, to reduce the number of trucks as quickly as possible. To reduce the support crews as quickly as possible will reduce that carbon footprint. But overall, the change in the near and far methodology will have an impact on reducing carbon as well, which is why we made the change in the first place.
So I think it's short-term pain for long-term gain. That's really the aim for the sound of it. Thank you. Councillor Hydry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of short questions, really, and so thank you to the crews for certainly in my area doing a pretty good job. I have sympathy for them when they're trying to find a old house at the end of an unmarked loop or a strange back alley in towns. Question really is, how many missed collections are due to issues with Serco, and how many due to householders not actually putting bins out on the correct days? I'm concerned there might still be confusion as to when a bin goes out. I often have to check myself to make sure, or look out to see what other people have put out. If I do, I'm sure many others are still getting used to it. Anyway, how does that proportion of missed collections fit? Second question after that.
So it would be difficult for us to break it down completely to that level. So the way our process currently works is a resident will call through to the contact center and report their bin as being missed. What our crews are doing when they go out and about is they will raise an exception if a bin's not out. So for instance, if they get to your house and your bin isn't out, they'll mark it down on their tablet as an exception raised. Where we've had quite a few either residents being confused of where their bins should be going out, or crews actually not knowing where the bin should be, we have seen a higher number of exceptions. We've still raised the missed bin reports even if there's been an exception on there for those reasons. So I can certainly look into trying to get that data, but I'm not sure how far down I'll be able to go, if that makes sense.
I think I understand that. Are you considering putting out any sort of reminder to households, particularly because you're going to have to update them on Christmas dates, presumably, and what collection of additional waste over Christmas?
The Christmas collection dates were included in the leaflet that was delivered by Serco, so that takes things through, I think, to the end of January. We have looked at the idea of doing another pre-Christmas reminder of not only the new collection arrangements, but also the Christmas collection dates. But it's, you know, getting 55,000 leaflets designed and printed is not an overnight task. But it's something we have been looking at doing. In terms of the miscollections, a miscollection would normally only be accepted if the bin or the crew hadn't logged an exception, as George has said, but we have, since certainly those that have come into the council, since the change of collection arrangements, we have been very flexible with people in terms of where exceptions have been logged, because we are conscious that crews may not know exactly where they should have gone to get the bin. And I think our chairman is one example of that, where his bag was not perhaps noticed because the crew were not familiar with that collection, and we've put arrangements in place now to make that clearer.
Thank you. I think some further information to households would be useful. Second point, if I look at the data, the last 2 days of last week, the successful completion rates are only 93%. Actually, so they're dropping back again. And 93% is not really satisfactory. So what is your actual target? I hope to see it at something approaching 98.5 to 99%. And you'll never hit 100 because that's because of human nature not putting the bin out. But, how are you going to ensure we get to that point? Because it's not good enough at the moment.
No, you're correct, and we would, if I'm honest with you, completion on the day. Our target is staying for 100% completion on the day. That's where we'd be going for there. So we did see a slight drop back in there. That slide on page 7 is the completion rates for all the rounds, including the garden waste as well. The next page over actually separates out the all of the properties missed, and then the second set of graphs there is the properties missed excluding the garden waste. So that's just refuse and recycling. And partly because garden waste wasn't involved in our transition, so we haven't actually changed our garden waste model at all. We're still running the same garden waste collections, and we are seeing we were actually hoping garden waste would have tailed off slightly to help us. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened due to the weather. So we are seeing still a high number of garden waste collections, which is contributing towards some of that completion rate not being done. With regards to moving towards getting that completion rate done, is that's using our support crews more effectively in the day, so that we can make sure that properties are completed on the day, and then that supports the crews with some of their local knowledge as well, so where they've got areas. So that is what we're moving towards over the next 2 weeks, is instead of where we have been, and some of this was due to the lack of drivers at the beginning, where we would fail on the day and then catch up the next day. We want to move to a point where we're using those resources in day, and the supervisors are able to recognize where we might be failing, so that we can put more resource into that area to bring the completion rate up to 100%. So that's the aim over the next 2 weeks, is to get us to that point.
I think I'll hold you to that.
Just on the second question, or the first question you had, Councillor Heinrich, around collection days. Just a reminder to all members and to residents that we do on our website have a collection lookup day, so that people can go on and look at, put their postcode in, select their property, and it will tell them the next collection day for each of their bins, including their brown bin if they have one. And then in terms of that garden waste, it hasn't been part of this target operating model. It is having an impact on the missed collections, partly because it needs to go through a restructure, through a TOM process. We are in conversation with Serco about undertaking that into next year at some point, so that they can introduce similar efficiencies in terms of round design. And also, you'll no doubt be aware that our garden waste scheme has been very successful and has grown significantly, and so we need to do some management of that to rebalance those rounds. So that will have an impact, but at the moment garden waste is contributing to those missed collections, but hasn't been subject to any of the changes that have happened through the target operating model process.
Thank you. You raise a good point actually about those people who don't put their bins out, and how we identify those and how they get picked up. I can see that's quite a challenge actually to get what I would call clean data on that, because just thinking about my own ward, there are various areas where it's quite hard to identify which property is which. Never mind when you get a collection of bins there, knowing whether it's the correct number, whether they are from the correct properties or not, and which one is missing. It's always very hard, and I have every sympathy with crews that don't recognise that, and so that therefore when it comes to light 12 hours later or 24 hours later, there is no way of knowing, I think, whether that was actually there or whether it wasn't there, and you just have to give the benefit of the doubt. So I think the data is always going to be difficult to cleanse to that extent, but that's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just very briefly on that point, actually, bin's not out. My neighbour doesn't always put a bin out because he lives on his own and doesn't have that much waste. So I think they're on a hide into nothing. So thank you to everybody who's here this morning. I didn't realise 4 weeks into a job that's halfway through. Tough call. So thank you for coming along and facing us. Around the numbers, I think it's become apparent to me, hearing there's lots of people said around the numbers, there's a discussion to be had, as has been suggested, as to what we report going forward. For example, I'll just quickly bat them off. Where it says there's 2,500 missed collections, out of how many? I don't know. It's not a quantifiable number. How many rounds were there that day? So I think that would be better quantified. And that would help me then to decide the second bit, which I think you described, but I still didn't quite grab. Where we say about we've collected 96% on a day. Is that 96% of what should have been collected? Is it 96% of what should have been collected plus the ones that we're due to collect because we missed them the day before? It doesn't tell me directly. If it's as simple as 96% of what should have been collected and all the missed bins aren't included in that, that's fine. But I just think I'd like a little bit of narrative to go with that. But I think it's a conversation that has been identified that we need to have. So I don't know if you want to do that. And if not, I've just got a follow-up question from the minutes from the 16th of October. It was raised by Councillor Butikoff, and it was about customer services and dealing with concerns raised by residents more promptly and accurately. It was on page 18 of the minutes for the 12th of October, item 6 BI. Yeah. So I just wondered if we'd obviously we've got some numbers here, but I think our members may be able to answer better how they feel about that now. I'd like to know that's moved on. Thank you.
So in terms of the numbers and this presentation, I'm hoping it will become that level of detail and the level of drilling down will become less relevant, because my expectation is that you will be seeing 100% across everything. And so the level of detail will be, will not be necessary. I think that, so this is the slight difficulty. So a missed collection from our point of view is one that's not completed on the scheduled day. But to a resident, if the crews then turn back up the next morning and pick the bin up, then it's not been missed. They've had their bin collected. And from our point of view, in terms of rectification, Serco are allowed a day effectively, providing they pick that day up. There is no performance management deduction associated with that. We would expect a crew to go back and pick their own misses up. But at the moment, I think in terms of those support crews that are out there, given the level, we are mopping those up through those not completed because they've run out of time or because they've had an issue in the morning. They are being mopped up by the support crews. But crews are going back and now doing their sporadic misses. And the reason they're now going back and doing their own sporadic misses is because how do you learn if you've missed a property down a little loke and you don't go back and pick it up because someone else, a support crew, goes and does it? Those. So I think at the moment we're seeing almost an element of work that's being caused by the lack of knowledge, etc. So over a period of time, we anticipate that the support crews will drop off, but crews will drop, not make as many sporadic misses, and that there will be less need for all of that. So I think, the situation in general should, and we will continue to hold Serco's feet to the fire on this, will improve. So I think, just from that point of view, we should see better. I don't know whether Officer Martin wants to make any comment on anything else.
Just in terms of the numbers, it's around 70,000 collections per week. So each of the 55,500 households has either the waste or recycling bin done. Around 12,000 garden bins each week, and around 2,500 trade waste and recycling bins each week.
And yeah, I wasn't looking to go into more detail. I just felt it needed to be more contextual so that it gave perspective, as was mentioned earlier about keeping the scales the same. It makes much more perspective, much easier. We've got less questions to ask. We can deal with it. So, and then the other question I think was whether we've had any improvement in the call centre and how they're picking up and dealing with it, because that was some of the complaints that we had locally. Was the responses?
Sorry, yes. So call centre wise, I think we are. I think we're seeing an improvement because the number of calls going in are dropping off. In terms of complaint handling, we had a meeting with Serco last Thursday with the other authorities around the gap analysis, etc. one of the areas that we had quite a lot of discussion was about complaint handling, and we've undertaken to do some more work, or we've asked Circa to go back and look at what they're doing around assurance, around complaint handling, etc. And we've undertaken to do some more work as the three authorities with Circa in respect of complaints, so that we make sure that we're getting that right for residents. So it's an ongoing piece of work to make sure that Circa are following their methodology that they stated in the bid, basically, and that we're getting those things closed down in the way that we want them to, with a satisfactory outcome.
Thank you. Just finally, Mr. Chairman, I do have sympathy with the crews. In a previous life, I had an HGV license and I drove a crane lorry for a builder's merchant in North Norfolk, and I understand what it's like in some of these lanes.
I was just about to say, Mr. Chair, I think we've now got 2 loaders and an HGV.
Yeah, I think we're going to make it to the crew here.
You'll have to get me
Right.
recertified.
Just speak to us afterwards.
My CPC's out of date.
Thank you. Councillor Withington.
Thank you. I think you have answered it, but I just want to, in the last few sentences, but I'd just like to clarify it. So the missed bins data that we see in front of us is every bin that is not collected on the right day.
So on the very last page, the property is not completed on day of completion. That is the bins that aren't collected on the right day. The graphs higher up in the presentation pack are actually the misbins that have been reported. So these are taken, this data is taken directly out of our white space system from the worksheets that are raised for the misbins. So these are triggered when a resident calls in to report their bin as being missed. I've included both sets of data so you can see what's not been completed on the day of completion. On that last slide, those properties are carried over to the next day and then completed. As far as they go, the misbins are for ones where the resident has then phoned up to say my bin actually hasn't been done. We raise a worksheet and we send a crew back.
So in effect, then these properties that aren't completed on the day of collection are not part of that missed bins data. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're not.
Or could be. They could be.
They could be, but we can't be clear.
Yeah, they could be if the residents have reported them.
So some residents who've suffered repeated problems might ring on the first day. Some residents, we know, and we have this not just anecdotally, we know some residents will be used to their bin lorry turning up by 8 o'clock in the morning, and if it's not there by 9, they'll ring and say my bin hasn't been collected. And that's that for a lot of people, regularity in terms of that sort of collection is what they expect, they're used to, and so they assume that it's not happening. And obviously the reporting we've had around this has highlighted for some people problems with their bin collections. And so I think there is a real mixture. I mean, we came back to that question of to what degree of people not putting their bins out, etc., and those issues. We have had some people who've said my bin's been missed week on week on week and I haven't had a collection. But when we've looked into it, they haven't actually reported it to anybody. They haven't produced a lot of, they don't produce very much waste. So they put the bin out, no one collects it. Well, it doesn't really matter because I've still got capacity in my bin, and they've only really reported it for the first time after four missed rounds potentially, when it's got full, and they've said, well, now I have got a problem. And so I think the picture is not as simple as not a missed bin or missed bin, my bin hasn't been collected. There are 70,000 collections, and every one of those collections is fractionally different, and every one of those misses is fractionally different. So I think the picture is incredibly complex.
Right. Okay. You finished?
One thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, Scott and I have been in regular contact over a couple of areas, and they do tend to be the lokes and those difficult areas where bins have repeatedly not been collected or have been collected late. They've got there, but they're collected on a different day. Is there going to be a review of some kind looking at, well, actually that round is not feasible. We're never going to get to that particular location on that round on the same day, and therefore we need to move it, or etc. Is there going to be a review of that at some point?
I'll make just two comments on that. Let's get things working properly before we try to review something, because in theory it should work. Having said that, Serco will always, and the crews will always review stuff. So you can imagine when they do a route and round optimization, it's not done by walking around the streets. It's done on a round optimization piece of software. There are already routes where crews have come in and said, well, you've assumed this is collected from the front. So one side of the street, one crew, one side of the street, potentially another crew, but actually it's collected from the back. So we'll do it rather than, so there will always be those adjustments. And over time, we will continue to have to look at those. We did it on the previous contract. It just so happens that this is such a massive reroute, but they will go on all the time. What I want to not do is knee jerk into something that says, we have to review something. We have to get it working properly first. And then if there is a need for looking at any specific aspects of it, we'll do that on a case by case basis.
Okay, thank you. I'm mindful we've spent an hour on this already.
You're on question 1 so far.
Well, we'll come to that in a moment. I've got three more questioners, and we've got four other points to cover. So brevity, please, is the key to this. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. So next question, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I represent Wells next to sea, which is full of nice narrow streets and alleyways. It's also full of elderly people and holiday homes. So my question is about assisted bins collections, which have been happening. Thank you very much. But unfortunately, the bins are not then taken back. They're left in the street on a vast number of occasions. And if they are holiday homes, there's nobody to collect them. Or if they're elderly people whose sons and daughters live in the town, they have to wait until they come and collect them. And unfortunately, this causes a bit of abrasiveness between local residents and your bin men. It would be really nice if they could be put back, please.
I'll pick that one up. Just on the holiday homes matter. If it's a business rated property, then they shouldn't be receiving domestic waste collections. And on the domestic service, so people can have second homes and still remain on council tax. We do not provide an assisted collection simply because the resident isn't going to be at the property. That's not what that service is designed for. However, the commercial waste collections are what we call pull and return. So the crew will go into the property, take the bin out, empty it and return it to its collection point. If you have residents who have complaints about bins not being returned, then by all means, please send them through to us and we will log it with Serco and ask that to be rectified for the future.
Okay, as a message maybe to take back there or two. Councillor Blathwayt.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick one. I have noticed a report that Broadland District Council have an app called Binfluencer, apparently. This downloadable app, you can actually see when your bin is being emptied and things like that. So though I am a great admirer of the present system of the on the internet, which I've used myself, have we looked at this app, and do we know if it's working in Broadland?
I've been contacted by the company that supply that app to Broadland and South Norfolk. I don't believe it's working in Broadland yet. They told me this yesterday, and as a Broadland resident, I've seen no communication about it in Broadland yet. South Norfolk, obviously those two councils work very closely together, don't they? They have launched it in South Norfolk. From what I've seen of it, it's largely just using the information we already have available through the website, and I think our website is mobile optimized. I think the benefits of it are that people can set it to have reminders automatically come through to their phones, so there's some benefit there, but we do already provide that information, make that information available to residents via the website, as Steve said earlier.
I have a binfluencer. It's called Mrs. Hems, who tells me to go and put the bin out the night before.
Right, okay. And finally, Councillor Penfold.
Thank you. My question's actually been answered, so that's good. Just an observation, when I've had, excuse me, residents with issues that have come to me and I've passed them on, they've been dealt with very well, very effectively. So thank you for that. My thought is the residents have come to me because they've been quite frustrated that they haven't had that level of service. So could we just be mindful of giving the residents the same level of excellent service that I've had when I've come as the councillor on behalf of those residents? That would be something to aim for, I think. Thank you.
Right.
Councillor Penfold assumes he gets a better level of service than the residents, which might not actually be the case.
I hope I don't. I think that was the point I was making.
Right, okay, thank you. Right, now we've got the fourth point. We've had a really good discussion, I think, and I don't want to repeat those kind of discussions with regard to the following points, but I think we do need answers to these. And I think probably the simplest way is to address most of them to you, Mr. Hems. Are you comfortable with the remedies with regard to those matters that we've spent an hour discussing? And if so, are you comfortable with the evidence that they are working?
Yes and no to both questions. So yes, I'm comfortable with the remedies that Serco are trying to put in place. I'm not comfortable that those remedies are often influenced and affected by issues that are beyond any of our controls. But we are working very hard with Serco, and Serco are working very hard to resolve those problems. So I think, we will see improvements. As it was alluded to, figures have gone back in the wrong direction over the last couple of days. But those are, when we look into the back behind those are down to simple things like, a vehicle breakdown or a tyre puncture and things like that. So I think we need to look at the overall trend rather than day by day. In terms of your second question, which has now eluded me,
the evidence, are you comfortable with the evidence that you're seeing in regard to that? So is it actually being delivered?
On a trend basis, yes. Is it being delivered as quickly as we would like? No, because I would like perfection tomorrow. But I think there is certainly a significant move in the right direction. And I think, once we have resolved some of the other issues, some of the minor issues around external factors that I think will, sort themselves out in the not too distant, then we will be able to resolve those and see further improvement. So I am expecting it to bed down significantly to the level that you have talked about in terms of the sort of 5th of September, pre-5th of September and beyond. But of course, bear in mind that in terms of comparisons, every week of the year is a different collection week because it's influenced by weather. It's influenced, you almost have to go back to the previous year, because obviously we are a very seasonally based locality, and so we will be influenced. Garden waste collections will be influenced by the weather at the time of year, and we're seeing lots of additional, or more garden waste presentation of bins than we perhaps would expect, because it's been quite mild and sunny for a longer period of time and everything's caught up from the summer. So yes, I think we will keep a very close eye on it, and Mr. Martin, I know it's never far from his thoughts or often some of his team's calls.
Okay, I think the key expression is seasonally adjusted. I think we would recognise that is a factor. So in respect of that performance, then just to tie this one down, finally, really, when do you expect that performance, seasonally adjusted performance that we saw before the 5th of September? When do you see that returning?
So Serco had always said that there would be a level of disruption typically when you do a change for 8 to 12 weeks. I think given the scale of the change that we've, that perhaps Serco's position is probably more like the 12 weeks than the 8. I think it's the degree now to which So if the question is, when do I expect it to see it to return to a level of performance, given the external factors that would have influenced us had we already, had we continued with the old system, I would expect within the next between 2 and 4 weeks. I would expect by the sort of beginning of December, we will be looking at things being in a fairly normal, bedded in kilter. We'll have dealt with all of those issues, and they, there will be an expected level of performance going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Just moving on to the fourth point then, which really is the summary of information that we've got in respect of the target operating model gap analysis. What's the progress on that? So we got some of it presented to us, but is there anything you want to add to that?
So members might recall that, of Scrutiny might recall that I bought a paper previously that had a huge, great big long list of items. And you will see that we're down now to 2 pages worth of those. So in terms of the first page, effectively, those are the things that we've agreed with Serco in terms of delivering. And Serco have set out some timescales. Now, you'll see that well, there's a green and there are some yellows on there. So just to explain, the green is one that is coming in shortly, and I think is we don't want to introduce another service over the top of the target operating model at this stage and just confuse things further. So it's ready to go. It's just pen. I think, is that fair, George?
That's completely fair to say, and these affect all 3 authorities.
Yeah.
So we are structuring around them, but yes, that one is pretty much ready to go. But we're holding off, just making sure we get the current Tom correct.
And then the ones that are coloured amber in here are things that we've said to Serco, we want you to achieve the outcomes that you intended in your bid documents and in your method statements, but actually circumstances have changed. We want you to develop your workforce, we want you to do the recruitment, we want you to do all of these things that you've said, cycle safety, but is it now appropriate to do it in the way that you originally intended? Come back to us. So yes, deliver it, but actually if you want to come back to us and propose something slightly different in terms of the cycle safety system on it, we've said, do we need to have the whole thing, or do we need to have the bit that provides the most cycle safe without the flashy light on the back that perhaps isn't as that was what was originally offered, but perhaps is going beyond what is truly necessary for our locality, which, although we have cyclists, is not the same as an urban authority with in terms of a London authority. So we're just doing a little bit of adjustment in there to try and make it as reasonable possible, and so that we can deliver them in a reasonable manner. So the things on the first spreadsheet are things that we have agreed. The second page that you've got, which is all coloured green and yellow. So the greens on this mean that we are requesting the original method of delivery. The ambers on here are again things we've said, bid back to us, come back to us and stuff. So, there is one on there, line 13 on that second page, branded VW camper van T-shirts are for litter picking events. So we're saying, well, actually, in terms of the circumstances we're in, do we want a VW camper van driving around, producing carbon, etc.? We want the outcome. We want that support for promotion of sort of community engagements of those, but actually think about it in terms of coming back to us with a proposal. So some of these haven't yet got timescales, and the reason some of them haven't got timescales against them. So the first one, photo evidence to be provided. Serco have to go away and look at their systems from their suppliers, because Serco don't produce everything in-house. So at the moment there is a deficit between what their system will allow them to do immediately and what needs to be developed, and that is work that's currently going on. I think I don't want to go into a lot of detail. I'm happy to pick up any specific bits, but what I would say is there has been significant progress from the original position that was presented to overview and scrutiny, and that position is ongoing. We had a meeting last Thursday between the 3 authorities. We have given Serco priority around the delivery of some of those elements, and we've had a really good conversation about the expectations of the authorities around outcome not necessarily on some of those elements, not necessarily specific delivery routes through to that.
Okay, so would it be right then to say that you are comfortable with the progress that's been made on the target operating model to date?
I am comfortable that we are making progress. I'm comfortable that that progress has a degree of activity and pace. It was slightly delayed by the fact that we were all concentrating on getting the target operating models implemented. And I think now the focus has come, that now that's beginning to come through. The focus has come back onto this, and we are beginning to move forward with it at a reasonable pace.
Okay, well, sitting right alongside that is, so when would you expect to reach a level of compliance where effectively we say job done?
So I think in general, a lot of these, you'll see from the first some of these dates, and they haven't necessarily been amended because we have asked Circa to go away and have a look at some of these. But I would say that for the vast majority of stuff by this time next year, except where it is unachievable, those things are unattainable by Circo because of their system capability and issues, then I would say that most of them will certainly be completely completed and in place by this time next year. Having said that, the majority of them will be done much sooner.
Okay, all right, thank you. I've got two people wanting to ask questions. They need to be very brief. So that's Councillor Housden and then Councillor Brown.
Okay, question to George Roach. Do you feel the contract, you're being compromised within the contract?
In what sense?
In its operation, in the context of the whole of the contract that you're supposed to be providing, or you are providing, I shouldn't say that you're providing for North Norfolk District Council? Well, do you find some of the terms that are being placed on you because there have been missed bins and all the sort of things that have happened in the TOM and everything else? Do you feel this is a pressure that wasn't an issue? Well, I know you weren't at the beginning of this, but which is slightly unfair. But do you feel this is a pressure that's coming on to Serco from North Norfolk District Council? Is it a compromise?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily a compromise. I wasn't around at the original,
appreciate that.
The original signing of the contract. As far as it goes, what I would say to complement what Officer Hems was saying is we're in, for want of a better word, negotiations, but negotiations is the wrong word. We're in constant communication about what was put in our method statements and what is actually achievable, and how we can adapt, really. And I think that's sometimes the key to look at it is the contract was written and signed in a different time than we are now. So when this contract was written and signed, we were pre-COVID, we were pre-Brexit, we were pre a lot of things. We are in a completely different place now. And the one thing I will say, and it's a way I've always worked, and it's completely evident to me just in the last 4 weeks from the three authorities, is working in partnership is where we need to go. And sometimes that might be that we're discussing certain elements of the contract, and those form commercial negotiations that come through, but we're open to discussion. And I will say from yourselves as North Norfolk and from Brackland and Kings Lynn are also open to discussions to where we're able to bring forward something that goes actually that we just can't do for whatever reason.
Okay, you use the word partnership. In that context of partnership, would you consider there's a consensus that things are moving in the right direction to enable you to fulfill the requirements of your contract?
I would feel that there is a consensus. I mean, we're in the midst of a lot of discussions currently, and I think on every form of discussion and negotiation, there'll be concession on both sides. So there'll be certain things where we'll be saying, okay, we have to do that, and certain things where we can hopefully get concession back from the authorities on certain elements. But I think that is the partnership that we're working in and towards. So
concession or consensus?
I think consensus. I mean, I would like to say compromise, but it's not necessarily compromise. But I think what we are in is in a discussion where we can get to a consensus on what needs to be delivered, what's possible to be delivered in some of the elements on the gap analysis, as Officer Hems was saying. Some of those I have to take away to our suppliers to go, this was put in the method statements. I don't know why it was in there, but you know, are we actually able to do this? And then I have to come back and present it in to go, we can't achieve that due to one of two constraints. Either it's not physically possible or it's not financially possible. Those are the two elements.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
I think it would be fair to say that none of us, both on the client side and the contractor side, envisage the landscape in which this contract would currently be operating when we both procured and Serco bid. There is understandably and necessarily, you know, the reason that local authority procures a contract is that we transfer an element of the risk of the delivery of that contract to the contractor, and in doing so, the contractor accepts that in their process. I think we need to recognise that there will always be a tension between the client in terms of we're wanting to say we've procured this is what we're prepared to pay. You know, we're a local authority. You know, in terms of that, our job is about securing value for money for our residents. You've got a contractor who is also saying, yeah, that's fine, but we need to make money for our shareholders. And there will always be, you know, consensus is a really difficult word, because I think we'll reach an agreement, but it will always have a tension about it between give and take, because Serco have a position where they would like as much, you know, all of their costs, all of their risks, all of everything else covered. And we're saying we don't want to pay you a penny more. That will always be a tension. And I think what we realise is that we move forward in a route that says actually we'll be able to give and take in the areas that we can do so successfully. So there might be some elements of the method statement that we'd quite like, and we'd quite like them, you know, we'd quite like them to deliver, but actually our give is to say, don't do it as you've specified, because that sounds overly onerous on you. Give us give me the same outcome. I'm not bothered how you get there. If you could do it in a cheaper, more effective manner that's better for you as a company, fine. Well, that's how we can move things forward. And that's, I think, what we're talking about at the moment, is that we're working very closely to try and address some of those issues. And you will see bits of the method statement that will, you know, we will work to remove or to change, because they add not insufficient value to us, but it assists Serco in terms of those elements. But they will deliver all of the elements of the authority's requirements that we specified.
That's fine.
I think, to put a slightly different slant on that, I think we've seen evidence that there are appropriate processes of resolution in being, and I'm not sure whether you would agree with that, but that's how my perception. You are dealing with those matters in appropriate ways. Some of them are easier to reach than others, quicker, and others will have different resource implications. But the other thing I detect is that there is a spirit of partnership working, and I think that's essential to any contractual arrangement. So that's my sort of take. It's a very good question, though. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Mr. Roach. I'm looking at item 21, which I think is 8.1.6 contract reference on the second page, and in particular about the in-cab systems. Presumably the in-cab systems are designed to assist crews to locate where they're going to next. And we've heard a lot about crews being unfamiliar, regular crews because they're working in the east rather than west, and vice versa, and the support crews being perhaps entirely new to the area. Can I ask you if the in-cab systems are used in all vehicles, that the support vehicles, the regular vehicles, and in particular the garden waste collection vehicles? Because the garden waste collection is a particular problem in my ward. It seems to be the bins that are most missed and are causing residents the most concern.
So the in-cab system that we use is developed by Whitespace Work software. It is used in all of our vehicles. Some of the challenges that we do have with any of the in-cab systems is actually mobile phone signal reception plays a huge part in this, because all of our systems are interconnected. And for me, coming from Rushmore moving up here, it has been a bit of a challenge that the guys face in making sure that the office knows what they're doing, because they're not actually updating, because there's no mobile phone signal, which is a bit of a problem. But in answer to your question, we do use Whitespace tablets in all of the vehicles. So whether it's a support crew or not, they will have all their work on a Whitespace tablet. And with that, they can then report the exceptions that they see, or the completion, which is where we actually get our completion rates from, is as the crews go through and do the completion. With regards to actually helping route the crews, that's something that I'm taking back to Whitespace, and it's something we've been working with Whitespace on, because we would like the system to be more robust, where I could give it to yourself once we get your CPC done, and we can it can then actually navigate you to where you go, where you need to go. Now, some of that is connectivity issues with the mobile phone signal, and some of that is just general software issues with what Whitespace can and can't do. But those are challenges that we're pushing back towards Whitespace.
Sorry, Chair. I think in respect of 21 that you referred to, the bit that we're asking that isn't delivered, but we're asking to be delivered, is the audio beep that tells someone that's, so it's not necessarily the whole, it's not missing the whole thing. It's just one element of it that we're saying, yes, we want you to have that, because actually for us, it's important, because it means the crew are less likely to inadvertently miss a message on Whitespace.
Right. Okay. So we are at the point of I'm going to close this item now, but just before I do, I'm conscious we haven't heard from the cabinet member on any of this of the topics that we've been discussing today. So having listened to nearly an hour and a half of discussion, I think it would be appropriate to just give you the opportunity of saying whether you are satisfied with the situation and the answers to questions that we've heard today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I have been sitting here listening diligently. I'd like to thank George for coming along today and for the very professional way that he's answered these questions today. We meet regularly, Serco, and George is that relatively newcomer, but I'd like to assure everybody here that the issues that we've experienced in the implementation of the TOM have caused a lot of angst within the council. They've caused a lot of time for these officers. There's been a huge effort collectively between our officers and Serco to rectify the issues that we've experienced. Whilst I'm not making light of any of the issues we've discussed today, the contextual aspects, when you look at the numbers, as Scott has said, when you've got 70,000 collections a week and you're missing 200, that's 200 too many. I'm the first one to accept that. But when you put that in percentage terms, it's a very small percentage of our customers, and the vast majority have seen no impacts. I have personal experience when actually last Monday, my collection didn't happen. I looked it up. It was because the crew had, the driver had contracted COVID. And next morning, my bin was collected on time. So I've had very few problems in my area, although not to say others haven't. But am I satisfied was your question? No, I'm not. What I am satisfied with is the way that we've pushed and pulled Serco, and the way that we've cooperated with them to get these matters resolved. And I can assure you that Serco are as disappointed as we are as members. And I'm convinced of that, having met with their team and with their officers regularly. I think that's all I want to say. Some of the nuances that go on, you know, in my area, I had my green bin collected on a Friday, and it again came on the following Monday. So lots of people said, no, that can't be right. So they didn't put their bins out, logged missed bin, you know. People were saying, well, that's stupid, I'm not going to put my bin out 3 days later. Well, you know, that's their choice, but it gets logged, data gets part of the and what actually happens, as probably Mr. and Mrs. Hems would agree, is that when if you see a bin, your neighbours putting bins out, they put theirs out too. If someone doesn't put a bin out, they, oh, I must have got that wrong. So I think with any significant change, and let's be clear about it, this was a huge change for this council. A review of the operating rounds hadn't taken place for years and years. I mean, over a decade. It was well overdue. It has been painful, but the benefits will hopefully by next year, and in the new year, we'll be seeing reductions in fuel usage, less wear and tear on vehicles, less overtime, and less carbon being released to atmosphere. So I think this is the right thing to do, but it has come with some pain, and I'm happy to apologise to any residents that feel that they haven't had the service that they expect, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. All I would say is that sitting right alongside that statistical context that you rightly add to the situation sits the other side of that, which is whenever we ask our residents, what does the district council do for you? The most popular answer is, well, they collect my waste and recycling and garden. So we have to bear that in mind. So as we've said before, this is the most public facing service that this district council offers. And to that extent, those 200, as you say, they are too many, but we can't just kind of let it rest at that, and nor will we. So satisfaction is still a little way off. How far, I don't know, but I'm grateful for Serco, Mr. Roach coming along today, and I'm grateful for our officer team in fielding the questions that we put to them. And I think the next thing that we just need to decide is, what do you want to do next? When do you want an update on the situation? Do I have any suggestions from the floor? Sorry?
January, Chair.
So I'm happy to come back for January. That's no problem at all. The only thing I would say about figures, producing you figures, is that when we get to Christmas, we will hit Christmas catch up, and that will have an impact in terms of people's behaviour around bins, etc. Because often, even though we advertise it, changing the bin day from a day later, which is what we tend to do, is likely to cause some element of distortion in those figures. But we're quite happy to come back and look at that.
Would February be easier then, in terms of just giving you the time to do the stats?
No, I don't think we should go for February. I think we should go for January. Then we'll see the worst case. Can always come back in March, but I think we need to see the worst case.
Okay. January is a proposal, and how many, Mr. Batch?
This is clearly a member decision, but obviously the agenda for the January meeting of this committee, I think the day is the 11th of January. So the agenda would need to be prepared in advance of Christmas because of the statutory deadlines that we have to operate within in terms of the publication of the agenda. So it's within your gift, Chair, to propose an alternative date if you want to push the date forward in the month. And I believe Office of the team could accommodate that, but I am looking at Matt, your committee administrator, in terms of whether that is possible, but that is technically possible. But I think to have something that is informed by the 11th of January and is included within the agenda is not going to be possible because of the statutory deadlines we operate within.
Okay, Councillor Torre.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think January is good, but I understand Councillor Housden's point of view, but actually why make it worse? Let's see if it has settled down and get the data until December before we go into Christmas so that we see that it has settled, because we know it's going to get disrupted irrespective, and that would then fit with the timetable. If we've got data till December, we can then see if we want to later on how they handle those changes. But that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with data up until the breakup for Christmas effectively, but what you'd see is not all of December, because obviously the Christmas stuff, it wouldn't be possible to produce that. So if you're happy up until that week of the week before, then we can certainly achieve that.
I think the problem is that we spent nearly 2 hours discussing it today. If we spend another 2 hours in December, or even an hour and a half, it's a long time. I just wonder.
I would hope not to do that.
Okay, but I just wonder
so
if we just push the date in January.
I've been generous today in terms of, we've done an hour and 35 minutes actually today. We started at 9:45, and so we've given it a good thrashing today. But I wouldn't envisage. I would certainly hope that we would have no need for a similar session in later months. But I keep that open. Councillor Holliday, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, if we wanted to compare to last year, then that would take away the confounding elements of Christmas. So you did Christmas, your early January this year versus early January last year, if that's what you wanted to do.
Okay. So what's February? That seems to be the most realistic, I think. And I'm conscious that if we were to delay the meeting to later in February, that may have knock-on effects elsewhere, and I'm not sure that's entirely justified. So I think I would prefer to go for February meeting, giving that longer period of time and the better opportunity to prepare for it. So
25th of what?
February?
We've got a 25th of January as a reserve meeting, which I've just been told.
Well, let's just leave it there at the moment, and it's I think a watching situation, because
Chair, we will be at your disposal.
That's fine. So let's leave it there. We will meet next month anyway. So if there's a need to make a change on that, but provisionally we'll arrange that for February. Okay. So thank you very much indeed to you, Mr. Roche, and to you, both the officers, for your time today, and we'll move on. You're welcome to stay if you wish, but yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Right. Yes, I'm going to suggest that we arrange the next item on the agenda to be the coastal update. My only other question that I would ask is that we would normally take a break at about an hour and a half. Are you prepared to just carry on and see this matter through, and then we'll take a break? All right. Okay. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the Coastal Partnership East update report, and we've got Councillor Fitch-Tillett, and we have sorry. Right. Okay. Thank you. So I will let you do the introduction then, Councillor Fitch-Tillett. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased that we are able as a coastal team to update you on what we are doing. I know those of you that are coastal board members, obviously, most of you logged into our coastal forum, so it won't be news, but you have seen one of the out-facing services of this council this morning. We are the other one, because at the end of the day, people who live on the coast see us working all the time. And I will reinforce, the coast is the most important thing to this council. Not only is it the economic driver, but it also faces us with the greatest risk. However, we manage that risk pretty well. And I would like to introduce to you Karen Thomas, who is the head of Coastal Partnership East, who's come up from Suffolk today. And of course, Rob Giblin, who is our on-site manager here in North Norfolk. And I'm going to pass over to Karen.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right? I have to apologise as I have got a bit of a frog in my throat, so I've got my water there. Can I see the slides? That's lovely. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm just going to give you a bit of a run through of the sort of strategic aspects of Coastal Partnership East, and then Rob is going to pick up some of the sort of more local flavour that's happening in Norfolk.
If you just before you get started, if it helps you, you may assume that every member has read the paper that's been presented. So if you want to add to that, that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to put everything in context, really in the last 5 years, there's been quite a significant amount of work going on around climate change and sea level rise, specifically in relation to coastal management. In 2018, there was a quite groundbreaking report, which some of the people, my predecessor, Bill Parker, and people like Kelly Fisher at the Environment Agency were part of, to really highlight some of the challenges around coastal erosion, flooding and climate change. And then last year, ahead of the COP meeting, the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment came out, which pretty starkly said everything is at pretty much high risk around our coasts and all sectors are affected. So sea level rise and climate change will impact on businesses, communities, infrastructure, the environment, etc. What the report was also recommending was, as you might imagine, that we do something about it sooner rather than later, and we accelerate things like adaptation and alternative approaches to management, and we bring in a lot more innovation. And that's something that Coastal Partnership East have been thinking about for some time. Thank you. So I joined the team in June 2019, so I've been here for just over 3 years. I'm really proud to say that we support the 3 local authorities of North Norfolk District Council, Great Yarmouth Borough Council and East Suffolk Council with their coastal management services. We are all council officers. We work for you. We're not an external body, and it's all being done through a Section 113 agreement. So we share resources and skills across the 3 councils and work boundary blind. This year, very pleased to say that we produced my first business plan for CPE, which the board and our senior leadership team signed off on. And that business plan very much reflects our national responsibilities through DEFRA and the Environment Agency's flood and coastal risk work that we try and take forward, but also picks up on local plans, local strategies from the 3 councils and wider initiatives that are going on in the area to try and make sure that we weave together wherever we can wider outcomes in everything that we do around the coast. The business plan also sets out our leadership, our culture and our governance, and some aspects of our planning, some of the risks that we face and how we're going to deal with some of those as well. Thank you. If anyone would like a copy of the business plan, we can share those around at a later date. It is on the CPE website as well if anybody wants to have a look. But we work on a themed-based approach. Our vision is that through collaborative and innovative coastal risk management, we'll enable options for people, economies and the environment to transition to a climate resilient coast. And this is quite important because traditionally, doing sort of coastal defences, concrete, rock, etc., that is still absolutely what we need to do where we have large numbers of people and property. But on a coast like Norfolk and Suffolk in particular, where we have large areas of open coast, undefended coast, and arguably a coast that people want to visit and keep looking wild for tourism, as Angie said, in the local economy, there are other challenges that we've now got to try and balance. And there are some quite significant challenges as well. So we've tried to structure our teamwork into themes. Everything is evidence-based. Rob will talk a bit more later about some of the projects that we're working on to get more evidence. We have to make sure that our assets are up to scratch and are working properly for us. We need money and we don't want to rely completely on our local authorities and central government. So we're working hard to think about where else money can come from. We're obviously working closely with the planners to establish how we might plan our coast better for the future, and Rob will touch on that. At the heart of everything are our communities and businesses who currently don't have a lot of options in some of the places where we experience the worst erosion. And we're trying to find those. And my purple bubble should say investing in people and partnerships, which is the team. But for some reason, I've copied the wrong thing. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. So our governance is we have a Coastal Partnerships Board with members from each of the 3 local authorities. As you can see there, you have Angie and also Councillor Bothwaite. We have 2 members from each of our 3 partner councils. We also have an additional council member as well, Councillor James Bensley, because he has the Norfolk County Council Coastal Communities lead role as well. And we also have an operational officer group. So I report to effectively a group of senior managers from the 3 councils as well. And so you can see there, Martin, the new director, or I say new, been here nearly a year now, Martin, and Steve from North Norfolk's perspective. So we usually meet between sort of every 2 months and quarterly, and the board meets quarterly as well. And hopefully, as you would expect, we have standing agenda items to talk about risk, finance, resources, those sorts of things, as well as giving everyone updates on projects and what's coming. And also there's been a recent development with the Norfolk Strategic Flood Alliance in that we wanted to get greater join up on the coast for Norfolk with Norfolk County Council. So we've been working with Lord Danner and his team at Norfolk County Council to make sure that we also bring in the Kings Lynn and West Norfolk part of the coast as well. Our team structure is in development at the moment, but we have broadly a kind of themed approach. We are just having a few changes within the team, but on the whole, we have operations and engineering and monitoring, which is led by Tamsin Pope. We have work around resilient coastal communities and businesses, engagement, partnership working, which is led by Sharon Blease. We've got a funding team who are looking at the extraordinary challenge of how we bring in partnership funding from elsewhere. We've currently got Fiona Johnson in that role at the moment. And also we have a coastal manager role, which we are just having some discussions about because we're very pleased to say that Rob Goodliff has just accepted a new role as the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme Manager. So that leaves a little bit of a hole behind, and we're just trying to work out what we do about that. But on the whole, we've got some themes there. And we also have a few special projects as well. Thank you. Nationally, we link with the Environment Agency and DEFRA, and we have nationally there is a £5.2 billion capital programme, which we can all apply for funding to as risk management authorities and coastal protection authorities. We have been successful in attracting funding. Rob will talk about Cromer and Munsey later, and I've got a couple of other examples coming up. We also have done a lot of work on advocacy over the last few years, feeding into the new National Environment Agency strategy for flood and coastal risk management. And we're very pleased that there's also a new DEFRA coastal policy, largely because those that have gone before me and those that are sat here have nagged very, very hard to get coastal erosion very much in the middle of the discussions that go on about flood risk as well. We're trying to take the strategy actions that have come from the national perspective down to local so that we are able to get hooks in for funding going forward. That's a big part of getting funding, is to make sure we can demonstrate we're delivering national actions as well as local ones. And across the patch, we also have the East Anglian Coastal Group, which I now currently chair, that links into a group of national coastal chairs so that we can get information from other local authorities, and we can go with one voice to government as well as representatives of the coast. We have the Anglian Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, who have delegated powers from the Environment Agency and DEFRA to distribute funds locally, not insubstantial funds, out to projects in the area. There's obviously national research and development projects going on, and we work with the R&D teams nationally to make sure that if there are opportunities for us to have R&D picked up nationally, then we can do. And also as a team, we are asked to go to national conferences sometimes and to speak about what we do. We try and share our learning and pick up learning from elsewhere as well and bring it back here. We also have the Local Government Association Coastal Special Interest Group. Angie and I are on the working group for adaptation, and Rob and others in the team are also represented on some of those working groups as well. And I think we're making a big difference nationally there. And one of those examples is that there's an all-party parliamentary discussion happening in January, which we've been successful in scheduling, and our adaptation working group will be taking messages from Norfolk and Suffolk to that discussion to make sure that we're really putting adaptation on our coast on the national political agenda. And obviously we work for a number of different authorities in terms of making sure professionally the team are up to speed with engineering, environmental, stakeholder engagement work, etc. Everyone is working very hard to maintain their professional qualifications and bring the best back to the patch. Thank you. So just coming to our own delivery programme, we have a £200 million capital programme over the next 10 years, which requires flood defence grant and aid contributions from the Environment Agency, and we do that with partnership funding. So our funding team have to work hard to find partnership funding to match fund that work. We've also been very successful recently in 2 projects in attracting nearly £20 million plus of what's called FCRIF, that's the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Fund. Rob will talk a bit more about that shortly from Norfolk's perspective, and I'll mention something about East Suffolk and Great Yarmouth as well. Annually, we're looking at about £500,000 a year on repair and maintenance. We're likely to see that increasing, and particularly this year, we've seen lots of beach levels dropping and changing since the Beast from the East in 2018. And so our emergency works costs are going up quite significantly. And that is a big challenge for us to try and fund. So it's that balance between maintaining defences that we've got, but sometimes they fail. Thank you. So around the coast, all sorts of different things. We've got undefended, defended, Victorian seaside towns. We've got rural areas. And basically our coastal management skills needs to bring the best to each of those places. So where we have opportunities to improve the public realm or nature and the environment. And more recently, we are looking at how we might also start to influence development and design of buildings in the coastal erosion area through some of the project work we're going to be doing. We also work with other partners and their projects. I've put the Broadland Futures Initiative project there. We're also working with the Environment Agency in Great Yarmouth, for example. So we also need to bring our skills to bear on other people's projects to make sure we're getting the best for our coastal communities and vice versa. Thank you. Also, just to show you just a quick whip round the patch, some of the things that have been happening recently, significant erosion there around all of our coast. That happens to just be Pakefield, which needs emergency works. 25 properties are at risk if we don't do something, but it's very difficult to know what to do. We have temporary defence barriers that we operate and we managed with some of our partners like the internal drainage boards. We also have responsibilities for navigational structures such as the South Wold Harbour Arms down there. We are in the process, sadly, in some places of demolishing properties that are in the wrong place now. Rob's recently been doing some work around that here, and we've had some other properties in Suffolk where we've had to have demolition go ahead as well. We also link in with other people's habitat creation projects to make sure that the coast is a sustainable and viable place for all. And the one in the bottom there is our largest capital project in Lowestoft at the moment, where we hope to put in a brand new tidal barrier. Thank you. Just coming back to our adaptation work, I won't say too much about this, only to just say that we know that we are in a very reactive stage at the moment. And what we want to do is transition the team's work, also the communities we work with and the businesses we work with and the environment around our coast to a far more planned and adapted situation. That takes a lot of resource, and I think what we've been able to demonstrate nationally to the Environment Agency is that we are a good bet, if you like, for taking forward adaptation work on our coast, both through this Resilient Coast project, which covers Great Yarmouth and East Suffolk, and also through Coastal Transition Accelerator programme, which Rob will talk a bit more about. The main thing I think that we all recognise is that we need to give communities more options, and we're going to be working on a range of options from planning, funding, engagement tools, and innovative design to see whether or not we can give communities more options to help them adapt going forward. Thank you. Obviously, as I said before, we still have a number of very large capital schemes, traditional projects, albeit none of them I would describe as traditional. They're all incredibly complicated. Here we are in Lowestoft. We have a number of ports. We're working with the Environment Agency at Great Yarmouth as well. Clearly, our coast has a lot of economic opportunity. It also has a lot of social deprivation. So we are very aware of the fact that our projects need to deliver wider outcomes. And when we're delivering them, we work very hard with all of the other partners in a place or a patch to make sure that we get those wider outcomes as well. Thank you. We do a lot of engagement work. We have a fully trained engagement team. We have Chartered Institute professionals, and we link very closely with the communications teams in each of the local authorities to make sure that we are getting the right information out to people and responding to things like media and particularly when we have cliff falls and health and safety issues as well, to make sure that people are safe around the coast. And just to flag as well that we engage more broadly through the Norfolk Coastal Forum and the Suffolk Coastal Forum as our key stakeholder forums, and very proud to say that we've just had our 10th coastal conference for community to attend, as well as professionals. And we recently just had Tony Juniper as our the chair of Natural England as our lead speaker on the day. And next year that conference is going to extend to Essex, and it's going to be supported by the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee. I won't say too much more. I know Rob's going to speak on this, but we're also working hard to find new sources of funding and finance for our coast, because we know that we can't do all of the things we need to do without more sustainable sources of funding. Thank you. And as you are the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I thought we ought to just let you know that we have got strategic risks. Obviously, we're all in the same position when it comes to some of the changes politically, both nationally, locally, and in the global economy. Economically, we have found this year particularly challenging, as particularly supplies, materials, etc. The costs of those are going up quite significantly, in some cases doubling, particularly for things like concrete, steel, rock. So a lot of the funding and the finance that we've had lined up with partnership funding in place, all of a sudden we've got funding gaps. So we have to do quite a lot of work to make sure that those gaps get closed. I think we also recognise that there are a lot of challenges on soft eroding coastlines for people socially. We've just started to do work with the public health teams at the county councils who are interested in our adaptation work around mental health and improving the social environment around our coast as well. Technically, I've just mentioned some of the challenges that we've got in delivery. Also, we want to make sure we're in a part of the world where we attract good people and we retain good people, both in terms of our team and also our suppliers. Legally, there is an awful lot of stuff we have to do because of the beautiful place we live in terms of designated sites, but also to build new defences and to do new things around the coast. We're usually on somebody else's land, and so there's always permissions, consents and licensing required. And finally, as we go into the winter, it's always important to say that there's always increased risk of storms and challenges that arise from that for the team and for the people who are affected by that as well. Thank you. So to try and mitigate those risks, we have very direct lines into national discussions around funding. We're working hard at the moment to accelerate a lot of our projects where we can, to make sure that we have shovel-ready schemes on the shelf. So if any funding becomes available, we are in an opportunistic place for that to happen. And Rob's been doing some good work on that recently with Cromer and Munsley. We've also been working more broadly with suppliers to make sure through the SCAPE framework, for example, we have good, quick, streamlined commercial routes to market to get the best value. And deliver wider outcomes. And we have the ambition to develop a centre of excellence in this part of the country around our working methodology, particularly around adaptation. Our winter risks, we can't stop the storms, but we can make sure people are prepared and we can have plans in place to try and manage that. And obviously, worst case scenario, we can get to an emergency work position, but that requires funding, and that's often quite challenging to secure. And then finally, It's been a tough time for everybody, but we make sure within the team that everybody has the opportunity to talk about health and well-being and how their work is affecting them and how their lives are affecting their work. And we have the skills within the team and the flexibility to allow us to redeploy expertise as and when we need to. And obviously I have direct opportunity to talk to the senior officers at each of the 3 councils to make sure that we're doing everything the way that each council would like us to. And finally, praise and appreciation goes a long way. So we do quite a lot of that as well. Thank you. So to finish off then, really, we, I think, have got quite a strong vision for a resilient coast. We need to make sure that we have both adaptive and traditional methods to deal with the coastal change and uncertainty that we know is coming. We want to make sure we've got lots of options available so that communities do have choice, but in some cases there will be limited choice as a result of the impacts we face. And basically we understand that the sort of holy trilogy of economy, environment and people at the heart of everything that we do. And ultimately, if we can't get stuff done the way we want to, we're not scared to go back to national policymakers and tell them that something needs to shift at the top to help us make it happen. So I think that's for me to pass to Rob now.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chairman, most of what I'm going to say is in the report, and I'm very aware of time. So I'm obviously, if you'd rather go to questions now, that's fine. But I'm always very happy to talk about the coast, and I can try and do a very high-speed version if you like. So, yeah.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed for that speedy explanation of the partnership and how it works, because I don't think that many of us have got quite that level of detail. We leave that to the portfolio holder who gives us reports from time to time. I guess in terms of this is the first time that we have seen you during this 4-year term, and I think you should probably look at that in a positive sense, because there are many that appear here fairly regularly, because it is the nature of this committee to have to tend to focus on what you might call the problem areas, and this hasn't featured amongst the topics that this committee discusses from time to time and that members put forward for discussion for scrutiny. So I think in that regard, it's a good news story, and I think you've added to that by just giving us that organisational overview. And of what you've said, there are 2 things that come to my mind that are particularly positive. One was that when you said that you're working closely with the County Strategic Flood Committee, then that's really essential, because we certainly have concerns about inland flooding, and we do need some joined up thinking there, so that's really good. And I think the evidence that you put forward, the second thing here, is the evidence of the partnership working. I think that the collective approach of the partnership is, I think there's good evidence to demonstrate that that is able to achieve far more than if we were working individually in our individual council areas. So it's really good to see something like that working, and perhaps that's even a model we might even see elsewhere in other services that we provide, but that's a topic for another day. So I've said enough for now. I'm happy to open up to questions, but I'm mindful of the clock. So I've got Councillor Blathwaite and then Councillor Toy and Councillor Cushing.
Yeah, just say apart from being Angie's deputy on CPE, I am also on Broads Authority and Broadland Futures, so that's my interest. But the question I have to ask is, the panel, I'll call you, satisfied with you are council, you are council officers, but the most vulnerable part of the coast is between Cart Gap and Winterton, and that is EA. Are you happy that that tension between a government department as opposed to a council, that everything is satisfactory there and there is no danger of mixed messages, missed opportunities, etc.?
and the funding regarding that as well. They've basically had flat cash, and we're in a time of high inflation. So thank you.
It's a good question. So just to clarify, North District Council as a risk management authority, we have responsibilities around the erosion areas. So that's Kellinghard to Cart Gap. The flanking areas in North Norfolk are Environment Agency, which are flood risk areas. So they are extremely capable body when it comes to coastal management. And actually that specific area is part of the Broadland Futures Initiative, as you know. So that is being included in that wider look at Broadland flooding. As well. There is significant monitoring going along on all our coast. It has been since 1991. And the Environment Agency officer who oversees that area, I know regularly looks at that, looking at when beach tree recharges, for example, may or may not be required. Moving forwards, it's a hold the line policy along there for the flood protection. Although obviously in the latter years, it's very hard to crystal ball gaze sort of 75, 80, 100 years sort of in advance. But that is partly what the Broadland Futures Initiative is trying to consider as well. The shoreline management plan policies, it's a non-statutory document because it says hold the line. This is with any location, doesn't mean it's going to happen. You still have to find the funding. It still has to be environmentally acceptable, etc., etc. But it does show the intent, and that's what the intent is showing. With climate change, there are challenges ahead along the whole of our coastline. That is one of those locations, but I think we're in good hands with the Environment Agency.
If I can add to that, within Coastal Partnership East, Kelly Fisher from the Environment Agency working with us for 2 days a week. I don't know if you want to elaborate on how she works with us.
Kelly's role has just moved to the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme as well to support us locally from the Environment Agency on that scheme. We're absolutely delighted to have her. She's worked in the National Environment Agency team on coastal adaptation. She's worked with us directly on adaptation along our coastline. So we're very, very fortunate to have her. So.
Yeah, I'd just say that my question didn't imply any criticism of Kelly Fisher. I mean, a truly impressive person. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming along this morning. Thank you for the impressive work that you all do and in doing, what is really a challenging and demanding job. I've got two things that really aren't connected, but so I'll put them out. Firstly, is all the different organisations that you have to pull together. I see the same with the drainage boards. I sometimes wonder if there's too many. Does it get in the way? Does it slow it down? It's important that we engage with people that have interest. And clearly you do pull that together and you do make that work, but is it slowing things down? And I guess in a way it's tied to my other question, which is a bit more local, in that I've heard some instances of where perhaps repairs are taking a little longer, the smaller repairs. Is that something you're aware of? And if you are, is it something we're addressing? So that's kind of a bit more specific. It may not be so, as we've heard with the bin collection, someone could be saying something that actually, once you interpret it, it's different. So, and I'm prepared to accept that because it is only a small number that I've heard of. So that's it really. It's A, is the complexity getting in the way, but B, when we get down to doing these minor repairs, are we concentrating on the bigger things and perhaps losing it? Thank you.
That's the issue. I suppose you can always ask.
Sorry, Karen, can I get you to turn your microphone?
On the complexity issue, you can always ask yourself, well, what's the alternative? And I suppose someone's always got to be the lead authority. And it's who's best placed to be the lead, because whoever leads has got to basically knit together all the others. I know that sometimes it comes up every now and again that there should be one national organisation for each, for each thing. But I think what we have found, particularly in the conversations that we've had in the last couple of years about the national strategy and how that was going to be developed, is that there isn't the understanding of coastal erosion and coastal protection in any other national or local bodies. And as a result of that, I think coastal protection authorities around the whole coast are very much best placed to deliver on the coast. Albeit the Environment Agency have as Rob said, the sort of floodable areas in between. I think it is hard to collaborate. It is always hard to collaborate, but I think it's worth it because you always get the better outcomes. Whether it slows us down or not, arguably, if you can just go and do something yourself tomorrow and you've made that decision to go and do it, then you'll get it done quicker. But arguably, quite a lot of people probably wouldn't like it. So doing things collaboratively, I think, is always the right way to do it. It's very much at the heart of everything we do at Coastal Partnership East, because although it's tough, fundamentally you get better outcomes. There's always that challenge about how it's going to turn out, but it always turns out better when we've collaborated. So I think there are efficiencies that can be made, and we are having some discussions at the moment. We've been given the opportunity, particularly with the national challenges around funding. There are some internal reviews underway within the Environment Agency and DEFRA, as there are in other government departments, about where efficiencies can be made. I think we're all quite conscious of things like red tape challenge type stuff. Can we speed up some of our licensing and consenting processes with organisations like the Marine Management Organisation, for example, and where there are opportunities to accelerate things and do things quicker, we always highlight those and try and come up with, well, here's a way we did it. Can we repeat that? So I hope that answers the question about that. And then I think Rob can do.
And I guess in terms of funding as well, you'd like those processes speeded up so that when you bid for a funding, you've got a quicker answer.
I think
because again, you've got lots of people pulling at that.
The difficulty with funding is that once upon a time, you were either 100% funded by grant and aid or you got nothing. And I think it was right to move to partnership funding so that everybody had an opportunity to get some central government funding for their schemes, provided they could then get the rest. What's probably difficult is that the central government funding is actually not that complicated to get. You put in an outline business case and you go through a process, and out the other end, you find out if you've been allocated some funding. The difficulty is the climate we're currently in, where you have to line your partnership funding up. So first of all, is it available? Then when you've got it, if you were lucky enough to get it, you've got to align it with the timescales you need to deliver. And of course, with everything that's changing in the world at the moment, that can make it quite difficult to keep everything moving along. It's trying to keep everything together at the same time moving along. Plus, the other thing that we have to do is work in particular working windows around the year. So if we miss one working window as a result of a consent or a license or weather, we are then into another financial year potentially, and that might affect somebody else's funding and their contribution to our project. So these are all the things that we have to try and manage.
And clearly you're doing it well at the moment. But
trying to.
Okay, so the other part of the question was around repairs and maintenance. So interesting, repairs and maintenance on coastal flood structures is nationally funded with the Environment Agency. Locally for erosion risk is locally funded. We no longer get revenue support grant for that. So it's very much down to NNDC to fund. I'm pleased to say that actually we do have a really good track record going back many, many years of significant investment in our coast protection assets through maintenance. The old saying, a stitch in time saves nine, it's very much the case when it comes to coast protection. It's when things start to fail, if you can get in quick, often you can do things, not always, but often you can do things which can save significant amounts of other works. Not always the case, but that's often the case. So the teams out there all through the year, inspecting, identifying where there are issues. We also rely very heavily on you as councillors picking things up, and members of the public as well, to feed things to us, because we can't be there all the time, particularly in some of the more sort of outlying areas as well. So they're always out there doing various maintenance. We've got a lot of skills in-house in our engineering team about how to do things effectively, efficiently. Sometimes that will lead to prioritization as well about what's important and what's less important. So if something is reported, it may be, yes, we will do it, but it might not be straight away because we need to do this, which has a higher priority. Sometimes we also bundle things together. So you might be able to bundle maintenance together to get more efficiencies, essentially to get the money going further. So but if there are specific things which are reported saying, well, this hasn't been fixed, do feed it through, because actually, for whatever reason, we can then relook at that and try and reprioritize. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And congratulations to Rob as well.
Okay. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think as a committee, we really ought to congratulate your team on the breadth of work you're doing. Your report was really quite a revelation to me, just the breadth of actually being done across the whole coast. You'll probably appreciate as a member for Fakenham, sort of coastal erosion doesn't really figure highly in my inbox. So this is generally an open question, but looking at the areas on the sort of on the eastern side of our district, are there, or could all areas actually be defended against the coast with, with the right resources, things, or is it simply it's just best of holding it back as best you can?
It's a great question, actually, and one we've been asked before. I think sort of following 1953, there was this push for the ring of concrete around North Norfolk, and it was tried, but unfortunately, it wasn't built. And actually, it's probably fortunately it wasn't built. The reasons are these schemes have to be three things: they have to be environmentally acceptable, technically feasible to do, and economically viable to deliver. So they're the three key things. If we built defences, a seawall around the whole of the North Norfolk coast, it would have unintended consequences. One would be it'd have an impact on a lot of our designated sites around our district. When you have hard defensive structures such as a seawall, you get less sediment entering the system from the cliffs. So the cliffs provide that sediment, and the sediment doesn't stay on the beach in front. It moves along the coastline. So what we would essentially do, and what we are seeing is happening, is the beaches are starved, and they then fall and lower, which then has a knock-on effect on the defences because you have to build them bigger and deeper, and then you end up with no beach, and then you end up with not the tourism assets that we want and things. So there's a real balancing act along the coast about where you can defend and where you aren't able to defend. And the real push in the last 10, 15 years from us and through the Coastal Transition Accelerator programme that we're moving forwards with is to try and get a bit more equity on the coast. So, okay, some people are defended, but those who aren't, let's be able to help those communities, businesses and individuals as well, and to try and get a bit more equity there. So good question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thanks very much. I'm always hugely impressed by what you do and your presentation skills. So thank you very much indeed. Angie knows this, but I always worry about what happens between Cart Gap and the end of our patch. And not only because I live in it, but I just wish the EA, who I know are a hugely capable organisation, had your communication skills, because I haven't a clue what they're doing, what they're planning, or if indeed they're planning to do anything. And if there's anything you can do to help me with that, I would be so grateful. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what I will say is that through the Resilient Coast funding that we've just received, we've been able to get some new resource, which is fantastic. So because we're also supporting the Environment Agency in Great Yarmouth with their Epoch 3 work, and we want to look at how we can improve resilience for the communities and businesses in Great Yarmouth, we were able to secure a couple of additional posts. And one of those roles will be able to link more directly with the Broadland Futures Initiative and what goes on in Broadland on behalf of Great Yarmouth and on behalf of CPE. So between Rob and myself, we've been trying to cover a number of these larger projects. And obviously, the more detail that we get into with those projects, the more time we as officers need to spend so that we can look at what the ramifications are for our coastal communities. But also there is an opportunity to share learning on what we're doing back to the Broadland Futures Initiative. So I think what I'd like to say is that from probably the beginning of December onwards, we'll have more resource in CPE to be able to attend these meetings and understand and influence more what's happening with the coastal elements of those sorts of projects. And arguably through our reporting to North Norfolk District Council, through Angie's portfolio reports or through any other reports that you want to receive, we'll be able to give you more detailed updates, I think, going forward as that project progresses in the future.
So, if I may add to that, I think also we don't really get much information about what's happening to the west of Kelling. And I know Councillor Holiday there is the local member, so we do try, don't we?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Penfold, and then lastly, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Just like to echo Councillor Cushing's comments. It's not something I often do. comments about the excellent work you do, and thanks for the presentation this morning. So my question is around non-human populations, if you like, because obviously that the coast is critical to them as well. So just wondering about your relationship with some of the wildlife trusts, the RSPB, what that is and how that manifests itself. Thank you.
So at a strategic level, we obviously have all worked together on shoreline management plans and shoreline management plan policies that represent both the built and wild natural environment. As part of the work that we're going to be taking forward through our adaptation programs, we're already starting to have conversations at a sort of strategic level with a number of our partners about what they can get out of those projects as well. So a good example of that would be the local nature recovery plans, for example, having conversations with Dave Smart around what we can build in. Rob and I are both very keen to make sure that biodiversity net gain and natural capital aspects of our coast are properly assessed and evaluated. And actually that comes back to the point before where we have people who are at risk of erosion, there currently isn't really any mechanism for supporting them. Well, actually, if you can argue that the coast eroding has high biodiversity net gain and natural capital, it has a value. And so what we need to do is be working out what that value is and who might be prepared to make a contribution towards that coast eroding so that it does the right thing for the wider habitats and environmental aspects of our coast. And then I think just more generally through our forums, through the various AONB partnerships, we have various conversations at different forums and different places. But I think really these adaptation projects that we've got coming up are going to give us a lot more opportunity to have more focused discussion about how we make a resilient coast for the environment as well. Because otherwise it's very much, well, that's being lost over there. Hopefully something will happen over here to sort of compensate or offset it. But I think we actually would really like to see a much more sort of sustainable flexing back and forth of, well, actually that's fine for that to go because that's a natural process, but over here maybe we want to try and support something else happening. So sorry, Robert, if you want.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd like to echo the remarks of previous speakers and thank you for the work that you do and also for your presentation this morning. I'm just really through you, Chair, making an announcement, a point of information that next Monday, as planning portfolio holder and chair of the working party, we do have an item, as you may know, on the agenda to look at the coastal adaptation supplementary planning document mentioned in the papers. And I expect that I can't gainsay the outcome of the meeting, but I expect that I will be given delegated authority to make minor amendments after the meeting on Monday if we approve the document. It will probably go to Cabinet as a recommendation on the 5th of December, possibly signed off by full council on the 20th of December. So it's just to let you know that your visit today is extremely timely in that respect. And Angie is a member of the working party, and she will be there to make sure that she keeps me in check, no doubt.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That I think is the end of our questions to you. And it just remains for me to thank the three of you for coming along today and presenting and enlightening us on a topic that is certainly very important to this authority. But as I said earlier, you ought to take the fact that we've not seen you before as a compliment, and go, if you like, away rejoicing in that vein.
Did we discuss it pre-agenda, Mr. Chairman, the possibility of an annual visit? Maybe we'll see how that goes, perhaps.
Well, I think what we, because we're not far off the end of the term of this four-year administration, maybe that's a decision that we ought to reserve for a future administration. But yes, my personal view is that we ought to have an update from you from time to time. I'm not going to place a periodicity on that. But what you can be assured of as well is that just because you've not been here before, there aren't members who raise points of interest, and most of them Councillor Fitch-Tillett will handle as the cabinet member. And so I think you're not off the radar by a long way. But you're one of the sort of strongest blips in the good part of the radar screen. So
Very kind of you to say so, but we'd be more than happy to do an update at any time, Mr. Chairman.
okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, bearing in mind the time, I would suggest we have a 5-minute break. So if we break now and reconvene, as the clock on the wall to my right says nearly 10 past, if we're back at 15 that would be very helpful, and we'll complete the rest of the agenda then. So I adjourn the meeting. All right. Are we? Right, okay. Sorry? You have? Yeah. If you do, you do. Yeah, it's okay. Could we reconvene, please? Right, okay. If we can move on then to the next item on the agenda, item 11, prudential indicators. So I gather Councillor Seward is not able to attend today. Councillor Adams, are you deputising for him?
Yes,
so to speak.
Happy to. Yes. So, well, this isn't an item that tends to provoke an awful lot of discussion around the council. It's very much procedural. But that said, you know, very happy with the work that's been done to produce this paper. I've little more to say about it, to be honest with you, but obviously I'm grateful for us for turning up to speak about this item. If there are any questions today, obviously, you know, we need to do this to meet the requirements of SIPFA, and of course it's good practice. So there's nothing more to say on that from me. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Any questions on potential indicators? No? Okay, are you I think we're required to consider report and make recommendations. Yes, okay. So are you happy to accept these, and we can have any recommendations to add to this? No? Okay, could I have a show of proposer and a seconder? Councillor Fisher, Councillor Blathwaite, and a show of hands, please. Thank you. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you. Moving on then to item 12, which is the budget monitoring report for period 6. Again, it's Councillor Adams, are you leading on this?
If I can find the button. Yes. So obviously you can see considerable difference from the last monitoring report for the previous period. Some of the inflation pressures are starting to impact on the council's forecasts, and some of these numbers are pretty challenging. Obviously, you know, you're aware of the impact of staff pay inflation, of energy inflation, you know, that's affecting us all. And you can see the impacts that that's having. We've obviously already had a discussion today about waste, the waste contract, and you know, we're responsible for meeting elements of inflation there in terms of fuel, staff inflation. And I believe there's another element that possibly hasn't affected us as much with vehicle and plant, but of course, you know, that it does result in some greater costs. And leisure centres. We had a discussion about this, of course, at the cabinet meeting. It's coming to you after then, and you know, I feel we're in a better position than most authorities to deal with this situation due to the financial governance that's been in place here for some time. I think we're in a better position, arguably. That said, there's clearly work to do here to address some of these pressures, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the pressures grow as a result of further inflation down the line. So that's a bit of a warning, really, but I expect we will be able to deal with this, and I don't want it to impact on service delivery of the council. You know, I think we're very lean as an organisation. You know, the officers are doing a tremendous job at responding to all the demands across the organisation. But you wouldn't look to any of the services that we're providing, saying, well, that could go, that could be reduced, because I don't think we're in that place. There was a conversation that took place at the cabinet meeting around whether, you know, you'd seek to prioritise services. I don't think we're at that position. You know, I think the question was raised by Councillor Rest around leisure centres and that sort of thing. Other authorities have had to close some of their leisure centres, regrettably, and I feel, you know, we've perhaps been somewhat protected by that with the reef. You know, if still splash swimming pool there, perhaps we would have been in that sort of space where we would have had to have considered that, given the inefficiency of that particular building compared to the modern one we have now. So that's all I have to say at this stage, Chairman, but obviously I'm happy to engage with the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, I have some questions for you. Can you advise whether this is shown as a key risk on the corporate risk register?
I can't personally. Can I don't know if anyone else can advise. Maybe that's something we can come back to.
The financial position of the authority in terms of income and expenditure is identified as a risk. It's reviewed quarterly. The next one is due to be reported to GRAC in December. I think the risks are assessed in the preparation of that agenda, and I will look to see whether that risk should be increased in terms of the risk it presents to the authority. The mitigating factors that we would obviously employ are careful or more insightful control of budgets, a review of posts that become vacant and whether they can be managed without, or whether the roles or functions can be undertaken differently, and then any choices that would be presented to Cabinet in terms of if the position was felt to be unsustainable.
Thank you. I think that is an issue that we ought to be assured about at some point, that this is reflected, because I have no personal recollection of this authority ever being in such a position at this point in the year. I know it's a forecast position, but it's quite a startling forecast position. And if Councillor Adams, you're warning about this situation could deteriorate, then it is a situation that needs to be recognised and needs to be responded to. So I think to know whether that sits on the corporate risk register and at what RAG rating it's sitting there at, and also a bit more detail about the mitigation and control measures that would be available to ensure that we don't arrive at a position in 6 months' time or at the end of the financial year with this particular sum in the offing. So that's a concern that I need to reflect. Open to questions. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, can I just, it's on page 56, borrowing interest. Firstly, in the summary, it's interesting to see the interest rates the opposite way around to what we would normally expect, and that must be a real challenge. At 3.8, it says that the long-term borrowing has been budgeted at 143,532. I assume that's for the year. Is that? Yeah, okay, fine. I'm just trying to, I get lost in the numbers, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get some clarity around it. But interestingly as well, at 312, where it says our strong investment position means that one will outweigh the other. And so we're on a positive side there. But given in 310, where the rates are reversed, have we got any idea how long that's sustainable, that we will, interest rates on what we're borrowing are going up. But what we're getting on the investments is going down. At the moment, one is covering the other. How long is that sustainable?
No, I apologize, this isn't my sort of.
No, that's okay. No, thank you.
Oh, sorry, of expertise, but I believe that we are forecast until March of this, 2023. Beyond that, we are going to look at the liquidity of what we've got in our longer term investments compared to that short term need for borrowing, just to take that. So that's something we will be considering as part of the ongoing budget process.
So it's something that's being monitored.
Yes,
which
it
is,
is,
yeah,
yes.
okay, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to your point about mitigation, which isn't really discussed in this document, I was just struck by in the corporate delivery plan that undertaking service reviews to improve efficiency and reduce costs was red rag rated, and it hasn't been progressed at all. And I just thought that was the most important thing to do if we were heading for £1 million deficit. And I wondered if that seemed a rather glaring omission that we weren't working on that. Thank you.
So the corporate plan was set in 2019 and paused for the lifetime of this administration, so the 4 years to 2023. Obviously, we've responded to a global pandemic and we've done so very well, and that isn't an excuse. It is a statement of fact that this is a small organisation with limited capacity and some things haven't been progressed as was originally intended. So that was from an informed position. During COVID, that wasn't a priority. In the period since COVID has largely subsided and we aren't in that response phase, inflation has increased significantly globally and nationally. Since February of this year, there was an upward trend before the security situation in Ukraine, but that has worsened significantly in terms of fuel and agricultural product costs and global market supplies. And so the situation has deteriorated in the last 6 months. And that's why this report shows a worsening situation, all to do with inflation, as per the table at the top of page 55 of the report. So we are absolutely operating in a very different context, as both the chairman of the committee and the leader of the council have said. We are in a different situation from where we have been in previous years in terms of a period 6 budget report. And this is for this year. And the budget setting process to be taken forward over the next 2 or 3 months will have to reflect the situation as is now and as is projected for the months ahead in terms of setting a budget for 2023-24. So you're right in that those service reviews have not been taken forward as originally intended, but it is about managing the resource that we've had to respond to unforeseen circumstances which have never faced public sector previously.
Thank you. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate the point from Councillor Holiday. Clearly, the position has deteriorated somewhat since the last time we reviewed this. I think at the last quarter, we were being told and estimating a £470,000 surplus. Now we're looking at a sort of a nearly 900k deficit, and I understand the global pressures for that in terms of inflation that have driven that in terms of that. But what worries me is we say we can cope with it this year. If the council's not doing anything to try and make itself more efficient, that means in years to come, it just means that we can't forever keep dipping into our reserves in order to try and shore up position in order to maintain our services. So I do think it's something we do need to do as a council, is look and see how we can make across the board things more efficient to get more for our bucks, to make sure that the services aren't deteriorating. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't think the council is in any way dreadfully inefficient. I don't think there are really many examples of that. Of course, there are always potentially efficiencies, but you're aware, obviously, reading that particular document, where that sits, and you can see the timescales. We obviously intend to appoint a Section 1.1 officer shortly, and that's coming up at the next full council meeting. It will be something, of course, that the council will be looking at. With many of these pressures, we've have to say we've also seen less and less support from central government to local government over the years, and I don't think there's an awful lot maybe that the government will or maybe could do, but it has to be asked really what the government will do to help local government in this situation with all of these various inflationary pressures that are upon us. I don't think they're the fault of the council at all. So it's very much the case that whilst we've got to deal with it, I don't think it's as the result of any inefficiencies within the authority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Housen.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I've kept flicking through the pages. Employee inflation, which is nearly 500,000. What's employee inflation? Pay.
It's the salary award. Yeah.
500,000.
So the council had made provision of 2% pay award. That was in line with the expectations when the 2022-23 budget was set. Obviously, I've described or detailed the background to the inflationary pressures in the wider economy. The pay offer that's been made to local government employees is 5.3%. So there is a 3.3% difference in terms of the provision. That is across the board for white collar salaried staff within the local government sector. The final pay award, so Unison have accepted that award. The GMB and Unite are still to confirm for manual workers, but that's the best provision that we have at the present time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Right, there are 3 recommendations, but in the light of the conversation that we've had around risk and risk register and what the chief executive has said with regard to the audit with GRAC, it seems to me that perhaps when we look at the 3 recommendations, recommendation 3 might well deserve an amendment there to initially to the first part of that. So could read recommend that the overspend be reflected in the corporate risk register as determined by GRAC. And then the rest of that recommendation, I think, probably stands as it is, to reflect our concern that this is being considered at the most appropriate level. We obviously will leave it to GRAC to determine what RAG rating that should be and to look more closely into the mitigation measures. But this committee, I think, at the next budget monitoring report will want to know more about where that figure is heading and the kind of control and mitigation measures that are being implemented to apply a course correction. Does that make sense? And does that sort of, I'm getting nods around the chamber. Okay, so if we recommend to Cabinet then, recommendation 1 is to note the contents of the report and the current budget monitoring position. Second to that is recommend to Council that any outturn deficit is funded from a contribution of the use of general reserves. And 3 will be recommend that the overspend be reflected in the corporate risk register and considered its risk rating considered at the next GRAC meeting. And then that would read, agree that a regular update should be provided to members on the measures being undertaken to mitigate and reduce the current forecast deficit. Does that make sense? And do I have a proposer and a seconder for that? I'll certainly propose it and you'll second it, will you, Councillor Housen? Okay, thank you. I could have a show of hands then in support of that. Thank you. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much. Right, that's item 12. So we've dealt with item 13. Moving on then to item 14, which is the North Norfolk Corporate Plan, the review of delivery for February 20 to October 22, and agreement of the priorities for the period up to May. Okay, councillor Adams.
Thank you, Nigel. Yes, we've had a a discussion about this elsewhere already. And first of all, I just wanted to say that again, repeating myself from previous meetings, that I'm very proud of the work that's been achieved by all officers across the council. The huge change in prioritisation that had to occur as a result of COVID could have had profound impacts on delivery of priorities across the council, but so much has still managed to be delivered with so little having to be dropped or postponed. And we know how versatile, how dynamic our staff are. They've adapted to those situations and done very different things during the pandemic. But moving forward to where we are now, we're in, I think, a very good position because so much has been done and done very well. That said, within the report and documents, I should just say thank you to Steve and others that have contributed and carried out the work to produce this. I think it's all very clear, but you can see where we are prioritising certain work between now and May, and where perhaps some of that will be postponed even further if necessary. And some of the work that you can see highlighted depends on certain other things, such as the appointment of Section 151 officer and other things such as that. So obviously quite a lot of detail here. You can see we've got some I think quite exciting things between now and May to do, some procedural, some more challenging. But hopefully this helps you see the general course of direction between now and May. So thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Questions then? Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just focusing on the reds really in the report. So we're talking about 3, I think it was, lost myself now. Too many pages here. Yeah, 3.1. The growth sites delivery strategy is. Are we still planning to do anything about that? Although it says a December 2022 date on there. I mean, I appreciate it shows that it's given the reasons that in there, but I'd like to know if we're still planning to try and do anything about that. And to go with that 5.1, the support, that's due for a launch in December. Is that still planned for December, given that that's next month? Yeah, that was just that. But I think overall, given the things that Councillor Adams has said, and the things that we've been through, I think the plan has been delivered pretty well with what we've got. But there are these few areas that I think we could try and bring in just forward to move back into gear if we can, to try and start speeding them back up. So just those 2 items. Is there on 3.3? Are we planning to bring that forward again? And 5.1, is that still going to happen in December? Thank you.
Who would like to respond to that?
So we've got correct me if I'm wrong, the economic growth strategy coming to December. I don't know if it's coming to the cabinet meeting, but it's certainly coming to cabinet members' attention for approval. So I think that's, yeah, the general plan is that it will be December, John. So yeah, some of these have been delayed from previous dates. I'm just trying to pick anything out really that I can sort of show to highlight you, but maybe that will come up in further discussion. But the plan is that there will be the economic strategy in December.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Cushing.
Just following up really on I was going to ask on 3.1 as well, and I know you mentioned this in cabinet on Monday, but to say that we're going to get an economic growth strategy in the very fag end of this 4-year administration seems extraordinary to me. And I don't really hold with the COVID excuse. COVID happened 10 months after this administration took office. So it makes you wonder what they were, why that wasn't being looked at before that. And I certainly know a Conservative administration would certainly put that as a high priority, and all its corporate plan would be in place really in a matter of 2 or 3 months, not the 7 or 8 months it took this administration to do that. And that is really crucial because, as you mentioned actually in the cabinet meeting on Monday, if you're looking at the local plan, the two do need to go side by side. And I do think we are missing a trick there that causes me a lot of concern. The other thing, if I may, if you look at the sort of performance data and something that is said there, what is the key performance measures for the district? So if you look at boosting sustainability and growth, the key performance measure in there is the number of businesses supported. Yet if you look at this corporate plan, I don't see any measure in there about the number of businesses that should be supported, any metric at all. So I just wondered why that has been omitted from the corporate plan or the performance plan.
Thank you. I think that's fairly ludicrous, to be honest, knowing how many businesses and that were supported, of course, during the pandemic. Award-winning response, lauded by government, the public finance awards and others, I believe, and they've continued to do so much work. So that was ludicrous. That was my response to it. And I was responding, Christopher, but I just think that's an attack on the staff as much.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, well, thank you for the clarity. I'll have to defer. Obviously, we don't have Richard here today. He's on leave at the moment, but perhaps we can get back to you on that in writing.
Yes, I think I just need to, I think it's timely for me to, I won't rehearse exactly what I said at Cabinet on Monday because you've already heard it. But I think it is unfortunate, to say the very least, that we are this far through the administration and we haven't got a current economic growth strategy for the district that looks forward and in particular supports the local plan, and the kind of alignment of those two is very unfortunate to reach this stage in the process. So I too am very concerned about this, and that isn't in any way to be critical of the work that was done in support of businesses during the COVID period. We understand that priority needed to be given to make sure that those businesses were properly supported and that they were sustained, because the first priority of economic development actually is to ensure that your current businesses are sustained. But that's some while ago now, and I would say one of the questions that I would ask here is, given the importance that business growth and economic development and the strategy that relates to that has, wouldn't it have been prudent to perhaps enhance the resources within the team at that time or soon thereafter, so that we don't find ourselves at this stage of the late stage of the administration putting together a strategy for a document that is badly in need of it in terms of the local plan. So the alignment of that work is a prime concern to me. So I think you wish to respond, Mr. Blatch.
So I'll be careful in my response in terms of not straying into a political space, and Councillor Adams has said that perhaps it would be appropriate for Councillor Kershaw to provide a written response in terms of the relative priority attached and outline some of the issues that the team have faced in preparing an economic growth strategy, and the process of presenting that to members in the coming months. The point you raised at Cabinet on Monday, Chair, has been picked up by Matt in terms of a conversation with the Director and Assistant Director for Sustainable Growth around whether the growth strategy, which I understand is almost complete, should be presented to this committee for pre-scrutiny in December before being presented to Cabinet in January. And that's a conversation that is ongoing. I've only asked to speak now in that Martin Fulcher, the director, hasn't been able to stay because he's gone to another appointment which was pre-booked. If he was in the space in the room now, he would have expanded on the comments that I think he shared with you on Monday evening with regards to the preparation of the local plan. So the preparation of the local plan and the evidence base that has been used to develop policies which are outlined in Chapter 8 of the plan that is ready for submission and will move forward for submission in January, as per a statement given by the portfolio holder previously, has been researched, is evidenced, and that's about the availability of the land supply that would support future business growth, both by existing businesses and future businesses moving forward. And that is judged to be sound and based on clear evidence of demand, including work undertaken by the BE Group in the first few months of this administration in 2019. So that evidence base is there. I think the wider issue around an economic growth strategy, given the nature of this district's economy, being predominantly small enterprises, self-employed people, businesses in the tourism sector, they don't necessarily have a land take. So the support that is provided by public bodies, both the council, local enterprise partnership, county council working in partnership, is around a business support environment which is wider than just a land use issue. So Mr. Fulcher has communicated that he believes that the land use element is properly reflected within the draft local plan, and the economic growth strategy will address those wider issues. And I think it would be better if Councillor Kershaw responded on those issues in due course, as Councillor Adams has suggested. But in terms of the issue about the local plan, Mr. Fulcher would have advised, had he been in the room, that issue is addressed in the plan as produced.
Okay,
Chapter 8 refers of the local plan.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Toy.
I just hopefully as an aid, only last week I spoke to our MP. I have 9 rural parishes regarding support for rural businesses with the current economic climate. And we only have a small business team, and they are very proactive in the support role that they do. So as I've challenged this morning, we need to bring these plans forward. But that's why I'm asking, have they got the ability to do that? Because not only have we had code, as been mentioned, we're now moving into a different economic climate where I'm getting businesses coming to me, these small rural businesses that are more than just a business. They are hubs in communities, and they are struggling. They employ local people. So whilst I accept the challenge, and I'm set here on overview and scrutiny to raise those challenges, and as I have, I think we need to be just appreciative of the small team, and I think they would like to deliver a strategy, but they need to support the businesses that are already there, and I've seen evidence of them doing that. They have already been around to visit businesses and come up with suggestions and support for them. So I just wanted to give as with the numbers this morning, some context to it, in actually the reality of them trying to achieve that. So thank you for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman.
No, I recognise the size of the team, and I recognise how the team has been used over much of that time. But if you have a priority, and if you recognise the importance of economic growth, for example, to the district, then if you haven't got sufficient resource within the team to deliver that particular outcome that you desire, then there is a case to be made to enhance the team resource to achieve that. So that is a recognition that would be expected of this administration, because you've then got the opportunity then to put that in place deliver what's required, and then we wouldn't be where we are right now. So it's not to be critical in any way of the team.
No.
It is recognizing that, but it is a fact that we are very late in the day, and this is quite a key document that we really should have had in place long before now.
But to be balanced against our own financial constraints, where we're already considering leaving, places empty. And as was explained, it is a support role. So yeah, let's challenge it. I'm not here to stand on the side of one half. I just like to keep things in context. So we are looking at something that's really achievable rather than something that we dream to achieve. So yes, it is a target, and yes, it is red, and yes, we are challenging it. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, well, we the appropriate page. The recommendation here is the Cabinet is after review and comment on the progress made against the original revised delivery plan objectives and agree those objectives where they would wish to focus to be directed over the period to May. Do you have a proposer and a seconder for that? Councillor Heinrich, Councillor Blathwaite. Could I have a show of hands then for those in favour? Okay, those against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Moving on to what I've loosely called item 14A, which was meant to be, I believe, an update on the reef project review report, which has been delayed yet again. So I've not seen anything in paperwork terms, and I'm not sure who's going to speak on this.
Just to note, I have spoken to Steve, and he's going to give that update as part of the overview and scrutiny work programme and update.
Right, okay. And the other matter that I believe we've got outstanding is there was a request for a cost analysis for the North Walsham Heritage Action Zone. That I haven't seen. I believe the request came from Councillor Housden.
It's in the minute of page 26 of the minutes, and then I followed up with an email which has been acknowledged.
Yeah, I have passed that email on to the relevant officer to ask for that update, but I'm yet to receive anything, so I'll chase that again today.
Certainly, it's overdue, and it would have been, I think, really helpful to have had that for us today, because then the full committee would be aware of that, and it would have been possible to raise any questions if there were any in relation to that.
Are we going to have that as a written response in the next few days, or
as soon as I get that, Nigel, I'll share it with the committee.
Fine. Okay.
Thank you. Right, then turning on to item 15, which is the Cabinet Work Programme.
Yeah, there's a fairly extensive Cabinet Work Programme for December. There's a few things that I want to bring to the committee's attention. The first is there's a Reaper policy going through an update to that. We were approached to ask if this is something that the committee would like to consider. I don't think there's been any substantive changes to that. So unless there is any comment on that, or people have any different opinions, then I don't think there is a view to bring that through. There is the engagement strategy on there as well, which has been expected for some time. Obviously, that came for pre-scrutiny. Moving over the page, something that was raised is, let's see if it's still on here. Obviously, the possibility of an economic growth strategy was raised, and I've subsequently made inquiries as to whether that's something that could come for pre-scrutiny. As Steve alluded to, we are still waiting to hear on when that will come forward. So that's very much an active discussion, but needless to say, we'll be keeping our finger on that buzzer. So as soon as it does crop up, in whichever way that does happen, we'll be pushing to get that to scrutiny as soon as possible, so as not to hold that up. I think that's everything from the Cabinet Work Programme that I was planning to mention, unless there's any questions there.
Any questions on the Cabinet Work Programme?
I did just note there was one other thing actually. Obviously there was that cost of living summit last week, I believe. That's cost of living and response to that has been kind of a pending item on the overview and scrutiny work programme for some time. So if that action plan comes forward, which is suggested in December, whether or not that will be turned around in that time, I'm not entirely sure, but that potentially covers something off of the kind of to be confirmed overview and scrutiny work programme. So interesting in seeing that come forward.
All right, we wait with interest. Overview and scrutiny.
Yep. Let me just find the page. So two key things to mention here. One is car park usage monitoring, which is report I did request for this month, obviously with the resource in the finance team as it is at the moment and people on annual leave, that wasn't able to happen. We'll be coming forward at the same time. We've got fees and charges, which isn't on the ONS work programme yet, but will be on there. So it'll come forward at the same time as that. Something that I think has been apparent is that there has been, I think we saw this in the last budget monitoring report, not this one, the last period, but there has been an increase in car parking revenue, and I think that was suggested it would help to offset the inflationary staff costs. So that's something that will come forward with interest. Another thing is the annual beach huts and chalets monitoring. I think there was a number of questions and additional data requested at the last time that came to committee, and I've shared those minutes with the office preparing that report. So hopefully we'll get something that satisfies those questions. We do have the enforcement update on for next month, I think, and there are, as we've just discussed in the cabinet work programme, there are potentially a few other items. So we may have a fairly heavy agenda in December, but without a briefing, hopefully it won't go on quite as long as this meeting.
Indeed.
So yeah, I'll just hand over to Steve now. I think he's going to give that update on the Reef project review report.
Thank you, Chairman. So we are waiting for a project completion report for the Reef project. I think there's been some misunderstanding about when that would be undertaken and the extent of it, and there has been some clarification gained in that respect in recent weeks. So there's the issue of the project delivery, the context in which it was delivered, and in terms of how that was delivered through COVID, the decisions that were taken early to facilitate the removal of the splash building because of the fact that leisure centres weren't able to trade, and how that then allowed for the relatively early completion of the car park as part of the overall scheme. There is then a series of retention monies which come to an end. So arguably that early stage report could have happened sooner. There is then a second stage in terms of the retention monies, which is 12 months after completion, and that concludes this month. And then there is a third element in terms of the assumptions made in terms of levels of use of that facility. Those three elements are going to now be wrapped up in a single report, which is due to be completed before Christmas and will be presented to you at your meeting on the 11th of January next year. That work is in hand. We have a new projects and programs manager. She has commenced that work. She's new to the authority, so she doesn't come to the organisation with any preconceptions. She's able to independently and objectively undertake that evaluation for you. And she has commenced her work in terms of some key interviews with contractors and funding partners for that bid, and that will be reflected within the evaluation report that she prepares.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's probably just worth saying that it's not helpful to have an expectation of a report, and that pretty much a year ago, when soon after the Reef was opened, we were looking at a report of this nature, not necessarily quite as wide as you indicated. but a review of that project. And throughout this year, our work program has seen a kind of slippage month by month without any significant explanation. And that certainly has been a concern. And I think it's always a concern when a report slips that length of time without some clarity around why it's being held back. And so I think that would be my concern with regard to where we are right now in relation to that report. It's refreshing and reassuring to hear that we will see it in that time scale, and obviously we will hold officers to account for that, having set that expectation. So thank you for that. Any other comments in relation to the work programme? No? Okay. Are you happy then are you content to accept the Cabinet and the committee work programme as presented with those comments that have been made? Okay. Can I have a show of hands then, please, for that? Okay, that looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right, that's the last item on our agenda. So thank you very much indeed for your forbearance with regard to the length of the meeting. But I think you'll understand the importance of certainly at least one of the topics does require a significant element of time, and we've given that a good airing. So thank you very much for your input on that. And I formally close the meeting.